The Milonio family, blessed by the spirit of light, ignited the sun, while the summoner-freed family called upon the spirit of darkness to create the night. The Milonio family brought life, bathing the world in warm light. The freed family provided solace, blanketing the earth in shadow, offering a refuge from the scorching heat. Thus, they established the Ubera Empire. Now, in this damned empire, only the Milonio imperial family and the Grand Ducal freed family can control the spirits. Princess Dorothea Milanio of the Ubera Empire was obsessed with history, always buried in books, but she was skeptical of everything she read. What pulled Dorothea from her studies was her older brother, Prince Raymond Milanio, who burst into the library. The boy apologized for bothering her and asked her to come play. Dorothea looked at her brother and recalled her past life, when she was a cruel tyrant, and this heir to the throne before her was the very person who had died by her own hands. Dorothea was now living her second life, a chance to atone for her mistakes, and she had no intention of messing it up again. This time, everything had to be different. Her goal was to live kindly, for she had learned the hard way that good deeds bring happiness, while evil deeds only bring pain. Back then, Dorothea was an out-and-out villain. She killed the crown prince, seized the throne, crushed her enemies, and bestowed wealth and power upon her allies. But when she had everything, all that remained was the end. The man she loved hated her to the bone and chose death, and the very people she had empowered eventually strangled her. So Dorothea had calmly welcomed death, but fate completely rewrote the script, giving her a second chance, a new life. She decided right then and there to live differently this time, and that meant putting up with her brother. No matter what he did, Ray clung to his sister, proud of her intelligence and knowledge. The boy had nothing but rainbows and sunshine in his head, yet simply by being born a prince, he received more than Dorothea ever did. Raymond kept pestering Dorothea to play, and just then, her nanny intervened, telling him to stop bothering her studies. The nanny noticed Dorothea was studying the history of Ubera and was impressed by her knowledge. The princess spoke of what she knew about the spirit stone that went missing during the Course era. The handmaiden marveled at the young princess's vast knowledge and wanted to let the emperor know about it. Dorothea's heart skipped a beat as she pleaded with her nanny not to tell the emperor anything about her. The emperor was Dorothea's biological father, but the word meant nothing to her, as she felt nothing. Of course, there was a blood tie, but Dorothea couldn't care less, especially after being cheated out of her rights to the Milonio family's power. Dorothea's mother, Empress Alice, died shortly after she was born, so Carnun was indifferent to the child who had taken his beloved wife from him. Back then, the girl had tried everything to get her father's attention, throwing tantrums and showing off how smart she was. She tried desperately to be better than Ray, but that old man never even gave her a second glance. Not even once. But Raymond was completely different. He effortlessly received gifts and opportunities to dine with the emperor. He could throw a million questions at the man and just get a grin in return, and she couldn't understand why he loved Ray more. Dorothea couldn't accept the fact that despite trying so much harder, her father never looked her way. So the only time Dorothea felt any relief was when she tormented Ray and took his things as punishment. The emperor would lock her in her room for a month, and the more this happened, the more their relationship became like a damned vicious cycle. Dorothea yearned for love, but her affection was a one-way street, never reaching him, like trying to scoop the moon from the water with bare hands. So yes, the seeds of evil absorbed all this anger and guilt, sprouting even more pain. Her jealousy, her greed, her willingness to step on anyone to get ahead. These were what created the tyrant Dorothea Milanio. But now, in this life, the girl understood that there was no point in blaming others for her own mess. This time, she was going to be a genuinely good person. The nanny was trying to persuade the girl to leave the library and get some fresh air in the garden. She suggested visiting the Ellis Garden, the Roden Ellis Garden. It was built by the emperor for his wife because she used to be homesick. She used to wander there all the time, but hadn't recently. So she obediently walked towards the gate. Suddenly, she heard the emperor's voice. He sounded angry because some people were heading toward the garden. Carnun hadn't seen his daughter in so long that he didn't even recognize the princess. The nanny quickly introduced the girl to her father. The emperor was unimpressed with Dorothea's etiquette, and she was frustrated that he couldn't even manage a proper greeting. The nanny smoothed things over for the girl, saying she was just surprised to see the emperor, as she was usually a top student in her etiquette classes. Dorothea lifted her skirt to curtsy, showing the emperor the proper courtesy. Emperor Kernan wanted to know what was so special about the princess, but she humbly denied being anything special. After learning from the nanny that Dorothea knew the entire royal family's lineage, Kernan demanded that she tell him everything she knew. The girl refused, and the father and daughter began to argue, each thinking the other was testing their knowledge. The emperor kept pressing, insisting that she tell him everything she knew. Dorothea stood her ground, claiming she was just saving the busy emperor's time, since he was too busy to even visit her. Suddenly, Kernan changed the subject, ordering the girl to ask him for anything she wanted. Dorothea knew she couldn't remain silent. Although she didn't need anything from him in this life, she asked her father to brew the finest wine and name it after her. The emperor scolded the nanny for letting a girl of her age talk about wine. Dorothea defended the handmaiden, saying she had read about it in a book about Babylonia. The author wrote about a hero drinking wine with his lover, which made Dorothea curious to taste good wine. At least once, Kernan, surprised by the little girl's knowledge, promised to grant her request if she could recite her family lineage. Otherwise, he would execute the lying servant. Although Dorothea had clearly inherited her tyrannical nature from her father, this time she complied because she had decided to be a good person and her nanny's fate depended on her actions. After that incident, the nanny thought the emperor would take an interest in his daughter, but he still never came to see her. The servant explained that Kernan's behavior was because he was too busy, but Dorothea was glad not to see him, as it would just put her in a bad mood. Suddenly, Ray appeared, and after asking a servant not to reveal her whereabouts, Dorothea ran off as fast as she could to hide from her annoying brother. The girl stood behind a pillar, listening to her brother boast about his ability to control the spirit of light. The spirit of light, the power that had once ignited the sun, could only be used by the Milonio family. But now it had weakened, able to light only small flames. Over time, some family members were born completely unable to control the spirits, and the princess was one of them. Raymond was frustrated at having missed his sister because a friend had come over and he wanted to introduce him to Dorothea. The princess slipped out through the back gate of the garden, not even noticing someone was standing right there. With a thud, she bumped into a boy with black hair and a red tie, falling hard to the ground. The boy was horrified that she had fallen. He apologized profusely, and as Dorothea heard his voice, she couldn't believe her eyes. Standing right in front of her was him, the man she had loved more than anyone before her rebirth, the man who had died because of her greed, the man who had hated her more than anything. Shaking off the sudden memories, Dorothea looked again at the boy who was still apologizing and trying to help her up. The princess hadn't stopped thinking about him for a second, and unconsciously, she spoke the boy's name, Theon. The boy looked confused, wondering how she could possibly know his name, since he had never met her in this life. But that thought was cast aside when he saw she was crying, and he tried to comfort her. Seeing his sister crying with the boy kneeling beside her, Raymond panicked and rushed over to help. The prince grabbed Theon by the collar and shook him frantically, thinking he had bullied his sister. Dorothea pulled the two boys apart, saying she was crying because she got something in her eye. Theon was both shocked and impressed that this girl was a princess, and that she had bravely covered for him in front of her brother. Raymond apologized to the boy for jumping to conclusions about what had happened. The two boys made up, and Ray introduced his new friend, Theon Freed, to his sister. He bowed to the princess and kissed her hand as a sign of respect, apologizing again for the whole incident. Dorothea looked at Theon, thinking about a new beginning between them, hoping that this time he would finally notice her. But her pleasant thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice calling out to Theon. Dorothea turned and saw Julia Delavigny, Theon's first and only love from her past life. Because of a deal between their families and Dorothea's stubbornness, Theon had no choice but to marry her, but he loved Julia until the day he died. That was Dorothea's past life, yearning for her father's love, but never receiving it, wanting Theon's love, but he wouldn't give it to her either. Even after they were married, Theon constantly sent messages to Julia behind Dorothea's back. She prayed for Julia to just disappear, to die, to stop being with him. When a loyal servant with a good record brought news of her husband's lover's death, Dorothea was ecstatic. The girl deluded herself into thinking her man would finally come back to her, but he broke free from her embrace and chose death instead. And now, there they were, standing with her brother, chatting happily about something. Dorothea noticed that Theon and Julia must be together in this life too, as they were standing hand in hand. Afraid that all her thoughts were written on her face, the princess turned and ran. Her brother tried to stop Dorothea, but with tears in her eyes, she fled from the people who had died because of her in a past life. Bursting into her room, the princess immediately threw herself onto her bed, asking her nanny to let her rest. The next morning, Dorothea was in her room doing what she always did, burying her nose in a book. But she couldn't concentrate because Raymond was pacing back and forth restlessly like a caged animal. Finally, she slammed her book shut and told her brother to calm down and stop pacing. Ray revealed to his sister that he was being officially named Crown Prince tonight, and he was stressed out. The boy understood how big of a deal this was, and he was terrified because he didn't feel worthy of the title. Raymond thought his sister would do a better job, as she was much smarter and more talented than him. Dorothea dismissed this, saying she couldn't even summon a spirit, so it was impossible. Raymond, however, was sure she'd figured out soon because she was really sharp. The prince asked Dorothea to wish him luck, saying it was a big deal for him, but she gave him nothing. The coronation ceremony was one of the biggest events in the empire, where they would name the next emperor's successor. Before the ceremony, Dorothea sat and looked at the palace decorations, which now seemed a bit cheap to her. Then the emperor appeared, and the princess realized she was completely numb. She felt nothing. She gazed at the scepter where the spirit stone was once set, remembering that before her execution, she had heard a fragment had been found somewhere. But none of that mattered to Dorothea anymore, and then she saw the prince enter the hall. Raymond walked slowly toward their father, looking worried, and Dorothea was afraid he would forget his speech. The girl was unimpressed with her brother's performance and the way he handled the spirits, thinking she wouldn't have messed it up like that if she were him. As the ceremony neared its end, the emperor led the crown prince toward the guests who had come to celebrate, while Dorothea followed silently behind them. Some ladies saw the girl and gushed about how beautiful the princess was, saying she looked just like her dead mother. The emperor flew into a rage at this and ordered the guests not to speak such nonsense. Dorothea was frustrated by what she heard, but she couldn't just leave as it would look bad. So, Emperor Karnan and Ray were the center of attention, while Dorothea was treated like a sconce on the wall. Before my rebirth, I would have pushed my way into the spotlight to show off how much smarter I was than stupid Ray. But now, not a single thought like that crossed my mind. I just wanted this to be over with. Oh great, someone's coming my way. Dorothea looked up and saw Theon standing before her, holding a glass of pomegranate juice. The princess was happy to see him, especially without Julia around. Theon offered her the juice, handing her the glass. They strolled through the hall, and Theon told her how Raymond had been bragging to him about his sister and her knowledge. The boy thought it meant they would be able to meet at Episteme. Episteme, the top academy in the entire empire, where only the most brilliant minds could study. And it was also where the children of noble families studied together to build connections for the future. But unlike Ray, who got into the academy without any problems, Dorothea couldn't go because her intelligence couldn't surpass the prince's. In my past life, she had fought it once, throwing a rock at Episteme, which ended up breaking a window and hitting the eldest son of Duke Bronte in the head. After that, the emperor locked Dorothea in the castle, and that relationship was pretty much over. So this time, to avoid repeating the same mistake, the princess decided not to go to the academy. After hearing Dorothea's decision and glancing at the prince, Theon understood and politely excused himself from the conversation. Not wanting to look like she'd been humiliated in front of the boy, the princess decided to change the subject, but their small talk about the weather was cut short when Julius suddenly appeared. The Grand Duke was looking for Theon, so the boy apologized to the princess, saying he had to go. Dorothea was disappointed that Theon had to leave so soon and was thinking of just leaving and going back to her room. The girl walked up to her father, who had his back to her, to ask if she could leave. Duke Bronte, who was talking to the emperor, turned abruptly at the sound of her voice. His flailing elbow hit Dorothea's glass, spilling the juice all over her dress. The girl was upset. That was the drink Theon had given her, and now it was gone, and she was a mess in front of everyone. The Duke rushed to apologize to the princess, but the Emperor insisted that Dorothea apologize to him instead. Ray noticed the commotion and decided to step in, saying his sister had done nothing wrong. But Dorothea had decided to be a good person from now on, and she bowed to the Duke, apologizing for her clumsiness. Bronte was embarrassed that the girl was apologizing to him when it was clearly his fault. The Emperor ordered a servant to take the princess to change her clothes, and Dorothea was thrilled. It was the perfect excuse to get away from his party. As she was leaving, the princess noticed everyone was staring at her. She turned and saw Theon and Julia looking shocked. Humiliated that they had witnessed her disgrace, Dorothea rushed out of the ballroom. The girl sat on her bed, hugging her knees to her chest, thinking she could handle her father's crap, but it was Theon's gaze that hurt her the most. Dorothea was trying to forget about Theon and the fact that he would never love her when there was a knock on the door. It was Prince Raymond, who had come to visit his sister because he was worried about her. Dorothea was furious with her brother, telling him to leave her alone and insisting he go back to the party. Ray refused, saying the reception held in his honor was meaningless and he just wanted to be with his sister. When the prince suggested they go out and have some fun, Dorothea snapped, leaping from her bed. She berated Ray for being so irresponsible, saying that as the crown prince, he needed to act like one and not just think about playing all the time. She grabbed her brother's robes and pushed him away with all her might, begging him to leave her alone. Suddenly, Dorothea realized that Theon and Julia had once again witnessed her embarrassing outburst. It turned out Raymond had brought them along so they could all hang out together. But all Dorothea could think about now was how humiliated she was. She slammed the door in her brother's face before he could say another word. After slamming the door, the princess collapsed to the floor, sobbing her heart out. She hated herself, feeling pathetic and unlovable, but she knew this was her path to redemption. For days, Dorothea was bedridden, weak, and with a high fever. Her nanny had been taking care of her, but Raymond hadn't visited once. He must still be angry. Dorothea hid in her room reading, worried she had been too harsh on her brother. Part of her was glad he hadn't come, as he could be really annoying sometimes, but she had promised herself to be kinder from now on. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Ray stood there with a package, a gift he had brought for Dorothea. The boy told his sister he had a secret garden he'd built behind the courtyard, and now he was giving her the first tomato he had ever grown himself. The prince boasted about his achievement, promising she would also be the first to taste the next vegetables he grew. The princess was annoyed that the prince, who had been accepted into episteme, was wasting his time on gardening. The boy tried to convince her that he wasn't just messing around with the garden, that he was learning too, and asked his sister to forgive him for making her angry. Ray rubbed his hands together excitedly, telling Dorothea he was frustrated because she never played with him. Reminding herself to stay calm, Dorothea calmly explained to her brother that this was no way to become a good emperor. He promised to study hard and be a good brother, and suggested they go for a walk, as he was worried about her always being cooped up in the castle. Raymond excitedly described to his sister how great it would be to visit the city, but she turned him down. After that, the prince started following Dorothea everywhere, begging her to go for a walk with him. He was persistent, even leaving notes in her books asking her to go out. Finally, under pressure, Dorothea agreed to go out, but only on the condition that she and her nanny go alone. The nanny was thrilled with the princess's decision and dressed her in a gorgeous gown, which the girl wasn't too happy about. But the nanny had been waiting for this day for too long, and no one was going to stop her now. Her mind was made up, and so the princess and she strolled through the bustling market. The nanny suggested Dorothea hold her hand. It was too crowded here. The girl found it awkward, as in her past life, no one had ever held her hand, and so they arrived at an observation deck overlooking the entire city. Dorothea was admiring the beautiful view and the happy crowd milling about, but her mind was filled with a different image. In her memory, it was a war-torn city, with streets full of people who looked more like corpses, and even the wind carried the smell of blood. But now, she looked at the musicians in the square and thought, so this is what the empire is supposed to be like without a tyrant. The nanny suggested they go see a show, and as they walked through an alley, they didn't notice a man watching them from the shadows. Lying on the floor with her hands and eyes bound, Dorothea heard two men talking. The kidnappers were angry that her clothes were more expensive than their dinner and were planning to demand a ransom, even though they didn't know who she was yet. During their outing, the nanny had dragged the princess to every shop and even bought her a new hat. Noticing the girl wasn't very interested in dressing up, she decided to take her to a bookstore. After the bookstore, the handmaiden suggested getting some fancy dessert and cut through an alley to save time. Suddenly, a man who had been following them snuck up from behind and swung a stick at the nanny. Dorothea saw the woman stagger after being hit and fall face first to the ground, and she rushed to help. The attacker covered the girl's mouth with a handkerchief soaked in some strong-smelling liquid. Now Dorothea lay here, tied up, just hoping she wouldn't die at the hands of these scumbags. It turned out, according to the kidnappers, that they had sent the nanny to get the money 3 days ago, but she never came back. Dorothea was shocked that she had been lying here for 3 days and figured the emperor must have given up on her and wouldn't bother to save her. The princess decided to take matters into her own hands and started showing signs of life, hoping to get the kidnappers' attention. One of them walked over to the girl, removed her blindfold, and greeted her with a friendly smile. Dorothea planned to play the cute, ignorant little girl and managed to learn the man's name was Tito. She threw some silly questions at him, like if he was going to be her nanny and who he was. Tito was completely charmed and patiently answered her questions, introducing himself as a friend of her father's. Dorothea asked if she could call him Uncle Tito, all the while plotting how to take him down. She listened to him praise her looks and was reminded of her past life. Back then, she knew a man who always said things like that and told her to smile. Dorothea looked around and asked the kidnapper where they were, learning that this was Tito's place. She saw a scar above his eyebrow and distracted him by constantly complimenting it and asking where it came from. Tito sat down next to the girl and started making things up, bragging about how he had single-handedly fought 17 enemies. Dorothy carefully observed her surroundings, then begged Tito for some food, saying she hadn't eaten for 3 whole days. The man asked his companion, but the companion was firmly against giving the girl any food. Tito had Dorothy sit at the table, and only then did she truly feel how weak and hungry she was. The other kidnapper stood up and held a knife to the princess's neck. He grabbed her arm, and just like that, Dorothy was tied up with her back against the wall while the brute returned to his seat. Suddenly, he let out a yell and jumped away from the table, having seen something moving underneath it. Dorothy squinted, trying to see what had scared him so badly, and discovered Scorpion. The kidnappers stood aside, trembling like leaves in fear, and the girl offered to catch the scorpion in exchange for some bread and milk. With trembling hands, Tito untied the girl so she could help. Dorothy picked up a few gambling chips to catch the scorpion, not understanding how 2 grown men could be afraid of it. The kidnappers told the girl to take the scorpion out of the house, and as Dorothy walked up the stairs, she realized the house had been underground all along. She didn't understand why they let her leave alone so easily, but when she got outside, it all became clear. No matter which way she looked, she couldn't tell where to run. There was nothing but an endless desert all around. As Dorothy was sitting there, nibbling on the promised bread and drinking milk, the kidnapper named Danny quietly approached her, and just then, Tito suddenly burst into the room. The girl overheard the criminals behind her discussing the news from the capital about the princess's disappearance. Dorothy was angry that someone in the castle had leaked the news of her disappearance, and now the kidnappers, to protect themselves, would not let her live. Realizing she couldn't expect any help from the emperor, Dorothy decided to take matters into her own hands. After the kidnappers left the room, she quietly went to the cupboard, found Danny's bag, and pulled out a knife, thinking it should be enough for self-defense. Dorothy hid behind the door and heard Danny send Tito to find the camels, while he himself would deal with the girl personally. Realizing her fate was sealed, the princess knew she had no choice but to use the knife. Danny entered the room, saw the girl wasn't at the table, and began to look for her. Dorothy, gripping the sharp knife tightly, rushed at the kidnapper from behind. She jumped as high as she could and swung the knife, plunging the blade into Danny's shoulder. After striking him, Dorothy realized she was too weak and the wound wasn't deep enough. The man spun around, grabbed the girl by the throat, and lifted her off the ground with one hand. Danny pinned Dorothy against the wall, and she completely lost her balance, unable to fight back. He held her with one hand and used the other to knock the knife from her grasp, which fell to the floor with a clang. Dorothy was exhausted, and as the kidnapper yelled at her, anger began to boil inside the princess. She gathered her strength and kicked the man hard in the chest with both feet, pushing him away. Danny fell, and Dorothy wasted no time, grabbing the fallen knife and stabbing him in the leg. He begged for her mercy, and she remembered that look, the look people give when they see a monster. Remembering her promise to be kind, Dorothea quietly asked the kidnapper to let her go. She turned and walked along the now familiar path to the exit. Dorothy stepped out of the house and looked at the desert she was about to enter with only one wish in her heart, for everyone to just leave her alone. The princess walked straight ahead, following her gaze as the sun began to set. It grew dark, and Dorothy was terrified by her own helplessness, for there was not a speck of light in the desert, and she couldn't even control the spirit of light. The exhausted girl lay down directly on the sand, finding it ridiculous that even at a time like this, she was thinking that if Ray were in her place, he would have been rescued long ago. Opening her eyes, Dorothy realized she had been here. Unconscious for some time, she gazed at the starry sky and suddenly noticed a beam of light moving toward her in the distance. Hearing the sound of hooves, she gathered her strength to get up from the ground, regretting that she hadn't just died. But the will to live overcame the desire for death, and she got back on her feet, waving her arms frantically for help. However, the girl had no strength left, and she collapsed face first, her nose burying itself in the sand. Through her slowly closing eyelids, she saw people in night-black armor approaching and heard many voices speaking to her. Dorothy opened her eyes and saw the familiar silhouette of the chandelier above her, realizing she was back in her own room. Suddenly, she heard the Emperor's voice and sat up in bed, listening through the slightly ajar door. She saw her father and her nanny, who was telling the Emperor about how they were attacked with the princess. Dorothy was touched that the Emperor had come for her, and also because someone had nearly killed her. But the next moment, all her feelings vanished when she heard her father complain that they only caused trouble. The Emperor ordered the nanny to find the person who leaked the information and to officially deny the rumors about the princess's kidnapping. Dorothy sat on her bed, thinking that no matter how well she behaved, her father still wouldn't love her. The princess believed that everything happening to her was a punishment for her past life as a tyrant. A few days later, the royal physician told Dorothy that although her fever had broken, her body was still weak. Standing next to the doctor was a maid the girl had never seen before. Dorothy realized her nanny had been fired and felt very sad because she knew it wasn't the nanny's fault. The nanny had always taken good care of her, and now she could only hope that the woman would be all right. To recover from the ordeal, the doctor suggested the princess recuperate in a quiet and peaceful place. They suggested she go to the Cerisian estate, and she suddenly realized it was a perfect opportunity, as she could now leave the imperial palace, far from Karnan, Ray, and Theon, as well as Julia, who was about to shine. Thinking she could rest and recuperate there, Dorothy announced she was going on a vacation. There was a knock at the door, and Raymond appeared, holding a bouquet of garden roses for his sister, something he had done every day since the kidnapping. And so, the prince learned that Dorothy was going to Cerisian by the sea, and he was dismayed, not wanting her to leave. Raymond felt guilty about Dorothy's kidnapping, but she tried to tell him it wasn't his fault. To persuade her to stay, Ray offered to help her get into Episteme Academy. The prince didn't know that Karnan had made Dorothy give up on the academy, so he kept trying to convince her to go. Realizing he was just trying to help, the princess insisted that she needed to heal. Exhausted, Dorothy asked Raymond to leave the room, and he gave his sister a sad look before walking out. Only a few days had passed, and the princess had already packed her bags. She was grateful for Karnan's indifference, as it was because of him that she could leave the castle so quickly. Suddenly, a voice calling her name interrupted her thoughts. Dorothy turned to see Theon standing there with a grin, saying he had heard about her trip. The princess answered him reluctantly, as he was the last person she wanted to see right now. Theon reached into his pocket and took out a gift he had prepared for the princess. The boy handed Dorothy some sweets in case she got motion sickness on the road. Theon was upset that he wouldn't be able to see her often, but he hoped she would get well soon and return to the capital. Dorothy had never felt this way in her past life. She thought Theon might like her, but she pushed the idea away. The princess turned and hurried away, embarrassed by those thoughts. Watching her leave, Theon clenched his fists, hoping that he and the princess would surely meet again. Sitting in the carriage, Dorothy told herself to stay calm and not get carried away by her feelings. But she couldn't shake the thought of him caring for her and bringing her sweets for the journey. Now, Dorothy stood on the balcony, listening to the sound of the waves and taking a deep breath. Now that she had finally left the imperial palace, where there were no traces of her as a tyrant, perhaps she could truly start over. In the Cerisian territory, Princess Dorothea was cared for by a castle maid named Clara. Clara also introduced Dorothea to Sir Stephen Greenwall, a knight who had been assigned to serve under the princess. The girl stared at him, recognizing him as the knight from her past life, the one who had risen to vice-captain of the finest order of knights, only to be killed by her. Dorothea realized that if he was 18 now, he had just joined the knights but failed to get promoted, and was instead stuck here guarding her. Seeing this, Dorothea felt sorry for Stefan and extended her hand as a sign of respect and friendship. The knight responded with a playful tap on the princess's hand. Dorothea sat alone in her room and decided to write a list of criteria for a good life. As the nib of her pen moved across the paper, she realized she didn't even know what a good life meant to her. She decided to ask Clara, who had just brought her tea and cookies, for some advice. The maid thought that listening to one's parents was a good start, but this answer did not satisfy Dorothea. Clara glanced at the princess's notebook and, seeing that she was about to write a wish list for a happy life, couldn't help but laugh. The princess was angry with the maid and ordered her not to laugh at her again. Clara assured the princess that she wasn't laughing out of malice, but because she found what Dorothea was doing to be cute. Clara suggested she start by smiling more, and Dorothy realized that until now she had no real reason to smile, but when she thought of good people, the first thing that came to mind was the smile on their faces. So Dorothy tried to smile. But after a few seconds, her lips began to twitch uncontrollably as she wasn't used to it. Dorothea shooed the servants out of the room, saying she needed to think. She picked up her pen and started the list, the first item being to learn to smile kindly every day. The second thing Dorothy wrote down was to stop coveting what belongs to others and to remember that the throne belongs to Ray and Theon belongs to Julia. For the third point, the princess promised to save 1 million people and vowed to hear words of thanks 3 times a week and donate to charity every month. After she finished writing, Dorothy examined the list, making sure it was enough for her to live comfortably. Tired of sitting at her desk, the princess stretched and walked out onto the balcony to listen to the waves. She told the servant standing outside her door that she was going for a walk by the water. Although Dorothy wanted to be alone, Stefan followed her, but he remained quiet and didn't disturb her. Suddenly, she spotted someone in the distance sitting on the beach with their knees hugged to their chest, and she was surprised that other people lived nearby. As she got closer, she saw a blonde-haired boy and recognized Eden Bronte. In her past life, he was the chief aide to the tyrant Dorothea Melano and the most handsome man she had ever known. In high society, people called him the golden-eyed angel, and everyone, men and women alike, wanted to exchange a few words with him. He was that stunning. He was a loyal servant who acted only for Dorothea, dedicating everything she liked to her. It was he who helped her get rid of Ray, then killed Julia for her, and did the same to everyone the Empress hated. He was the only one who truly understood how she felt, but she only saw him as a loyal dog, even though he longed to take Theon's place. To be honest, though, he probably didn't do it all just for her. When Dorothea was taken to her execution, many people said, "Eden is innocent, that snake." He used his silver tongue to absolve himself of guilt, claiming he was under the tyrant's control. Getting closer, the princess thought it would be best to stay away from Eden this time. But on closer inspection, she noticed the boy was actually sobbing his heart out. Dorothy froze. This boy was completely different from the Eden she knew in her past life. It suddenly occurred to her that perhaps Eden had also been given a second chance to live his life differently, without having to walk that dark path. The princess approached the boy, who looked panicked when he saw her. Embarrassed at being disturbed, Eden jumped up and ran, ignoring Dorothy's pleas for him to stop. A quick recap of the backstory. Eden was the illegitimate son of Duke Bronte. The Duke took him in, but the child was not allowed to enter the academy or appear in high society until he came of age. After meeting Eden, who was in a similar situation to her, Dorothy felt exhausted and decided to go home. When rumors spread that a princess from the capital had arrived in Cerisian, all the great families began sending her invitations, hoping to get on her good side. Dorothea made a few brief visits, and all the ladies were captivated by her beauty and grace. The princess quickly grew tired of all the attention and asked Stefan and Clara to get her out of there. The Duchess of Bronte, who was sitting nearby, invited Dorothea to be a guest at their home. The princess, thinking this was a perfect opportunity to meet Eden and guide him onto the right path, readily agreed. So the next day, the princess visited the Duke's castle and was greeted by the Brontes. The princess was invited to a lavishly set table, but looking around, she saw no sign of Eden. Dorothy asked her hosts about their son, but they thought she was talking about George and said he was at epistemia. She rested her chin on her hands and, with a serious expression, announced that she wanted to see Eden. After learning that the princess had seen the boy on the beach, the couple talked in low voices for a long time. They told her that Eden was ill, but she insisted on seeing him. Dorothea was led to a winter garden where a boy was sitting at a round coffee table among the flower pots. Hearing footsteps approach, he turned and stared intently at his guest. He looked at her with his golden eyes, and they stared at each other in silence for a few seconds before Eden gave Dorothy a shy smile. The boy stood up, greeted the princess, and introduced himself, saying he was glad she could come. The princess dismissed her escort, as she wanted to be alone with Eden. The boy asked Dorothy what brought her here, acting as if he hadn't seen her on the beach a few days ago. Eden looked with concern at the girl's delicate hands, and she claimed she was getting better and enjoyed living in the town. Dorothy analyzed the boy's every word and action, but she couldn't tell if he was genuinely kind or hiding something. Remembering that he always raised an eyebrow when he lied, the princess focused all her attention on his brows. She gave him a compliment, and he became flustered, lowering his gaze and covering his face. Dorothy realized that the Eden she used to know would not have blushed like this. He would have acted very conceited. Without thinking, the boy blurted out that he had never seen anyone more beautiful than the princess. Now Dorothy was completely confused, as what he said could have just been flattery. Dorothy remembered how she was always swayed by his sweet words, so now she decided they would just be friends and invited Eden to her castle. The boy jumped up in excitement at the invitation and, in an instant, was by the princess's side, planting a kiss on her cheek. Dorothy happily made a mental note to add this thank you from Eden to her list. But that night, as she sat in front of her notebook, she pictured Eden's smiling face and began to doubt whether he was sincere. Meanwhile, in the castle, Clara was telling Stefan that the princess's birthday was just around the corner. She was excited and wanted to throw the best birthday party for Dorothea. Since Dorothea hated dresses and jewelry, the maid was sharing her gift ideas with the knight. Clara was looking forward to the party and asked Stefan to help her plan it. Finally, the day Clara had been waiting for arrived, and she burst into the princess's room, setting off a party popper. The maid went all out, setting up a huge table with all sorts of delicacies. Dorothy was grateful, and Clara suggested they go for a walk since the weather was nice. The princess agreed, and they headed to the beach to breathe in the fresh sea air. Suddenly, they spotted a seashell on the shore, and Clara practically begged the birthday girl to pick it up. Dorothy figured the maid had probably hidden a gift underneath it, as she was being too obvious. Seriously, after turning over a bunch of shells, the princess found nothing. Dorothy turned around to find Clara gone, and, seeing a figure in the distance, thought the maid had just walked away. But on closer inspection, the girl realized it was a lion, and it was walking straight toward her. The princess knew it was Stefan in a lion costume, but to play along, she pretended not to know. Dorothy remembered she had once hidden an esoteric book inside the cover of Leo the Lion, and Clara must have thought it was her favorite character. Remembering her promise to be kind, Dorothy decided to humor her servants and gave the lion the shell she had picked up. She put on an innocent act and asked the lion if his visit had anything to do with her birthday. The princess felt a kind of care she had never experienced before and sincerely thanked the lion. A second later, the princess was in the arms of the fairy tale hero, who was gently hugging her. Dorothy couldn't believe she was being held by the knight she had mocked for choosing a bloody death for the prince. She saw the connection in their lives. Stefan also had to work his way up, as he did not come from a prominent noble family. Thinking about all this, Dorothea realized that Stefan had always been a kind and brave person. It started to rain, and the knight in the lion costume picked her up and ran back to the castle so she wouldn't catch a cold. The princess said goodbye to her lion hero without revealing that she knew it was Stefan. After changing into dry clothes and drying her wet hair, Dorothea glanced at a letter that had just arrived from the capital. Seeing it was from Raymond, she tossed it aside with all the other unread letters he had sent. Stefan returned to the castle, and he and Clara were talking quietly about something, excited that they had supposedly managed to fool the princess. Dorothea played along, asking Stefan where he had been. The knight had a ready answer, saying he was training. But the princess wasn't going to let it go, asking why he hadn't gotten her a gift. She wanted him to teach her fencing as a gift, so that if she were ever kidnapped again, she could fight back herself. Dorothy used to avoid making herself stronger, afraid she would become power-hungry, but now she understood that good people could be strong too. Stefan took the princess's small hand in his large one and agreed to teach her swordsmanship. Fast forward a few months, and Dorothea could already hold her own with a homemade wooden sword. She didn't understand why Stefan wouldn't let her use a real sword. Was he afraid she'd get hurt, or was he jealous that she was a genius? One day, during an intense training session, Dorothea was distracted by an approaching sound. Thinking Stefan was trying to sneak up on her, the princess turned, swinging her sword, but she stopped just in time, recognizing Eden, who was stunned by her talent, as he couldn't fight at all himself. Dorothea remembered that in her past life, Eden had never held a sword either, as he had more than enough followers to do it for him. The boy was glad the princess was feeling better, and he reached out, wiping the sweat from her forehead with a handkerchief. The maids, peeking from behind the bushes, were thrilled to see the two little angels talking. Eden took Dorothy's hand, reminding her that she had invited him to visit the castle. He asked her to show him around the estate, all while still holding the princess's hand. Dorothy, feeling that her hand must be sweaty, went to the bathroom to wash it. After washing up and changing her clothes, she led Eden into her room. The boy was impressed by the neatness of the princess's room. He looked around, rummaged in his pocket, and took out the gift he had brought and handed it to Dorothy. The boy opened the package, and Dorothy saw a gorgeous gold necklace studded with rubies and diamonds. The princess realized it was a very expensive gift, but hey, Eden was from a ducal family, so I guess he could afford it. Dorothy politely refused such a lavish gift. All she wanted from him was honesty. Eden was dismayed by the princess's refusal, and the princess explained that something like that was best given to a loved one. The boy confessed that he had gotten too excited because someone had approached him first for once, which reminded Dorothea of how skilled he was at playing with people's hearts. Eden turned, saw the letters from the imperial palace on the table, and asked the princess about them. Dorothy hadn't even opened the letters, figuring they were full of complaints about how hard Ray was studying at the academy. Pushing Ray out of her mind, the princess suggested Eden leave the room, but he suddenly froze near the dressing table. Dorothea turned to see the child standing in front of Theon's handkerchief, the one he had given her at the coronation. She rushed to the vanity, grabbed the handkerchief, and stuffed it into a drawer, hoping Eden hadn't seen the embroidered initials. But apparently, the child had seen it clearly, as he promised Dorothea he would give her an identical gift next time. As he walked to the door to leave the room, Eden gave the vanity one last silent glance. The next morning, while having breakfast, Dorothea could feel a tense atmosphere permeating the air around the castle. Clara suggested she return to the imperial palace, as a malignant infectious disease was spreading through the city. Many people were dying from the disease because the cure was far too expensive for the common people. Dorothea hesitated, as she really didn't want to leave this beautiful place that brought her so much peace. The princess realized this was an excellent opportunity to build goodwill, so she decided to use all her money to help people hire doctors and buy medicine. Dorothea could finally do something good for others. A few weeks later, Clara excitedly told the princess that thanks to her, the village that had been withering away from the epidemic had been restored to life. The handmaiden cried tears of joy, praising Dorothea's kindness, while next to her stood Eden, who seemed to have appeared out of thin air. The princess wasn't sure if spending a large sum of money she already possessed could be considered a good deed, but she received gifts left by the villagers near the palace in return. Eden assured Dorothea that people repay good deeds with good deeds, and that they would always remember her as a kind princess. She had never truly felt she had done anything good before, but now she was happy to feel the gratitude of others. Dorothea invited Eden to stay for dinner, asking Clara to cook the potatoes they had received and to plant the sprouted ones in the garden. 3 years later, Dorothea was still training intensely with Stefan, and her fencing skills had improved greatly. Of course, she was still not good enough to defeat Stefan, something she recalled only managing in her past life when she was older. After spotting an opening at his shoulder, Dorothea lunged at the knight. She raised her sword high, but Stefan blocked her attack, stopping the homemade sword from falling. Dorothea was angry. If it had been a real sword, there was no way he could have caught it with his bare hands. Meanwhile, at the academy, a gloomy Raymond was writing another letter to his sister, who hadn't replied to a single one in 3 years. Theon came over, patted Ray's shoulder kindly, and tried to comfort him by saying that Dorothea must be reading his letters. The boy suggested they visit the princess, since the school was about to go on break. Raymond was thrilled with Theon's idea, jumping for joy at the thought of seeing his sister again. Dorothea relentlessly pleaded with Stefan to let her spar with a real sword. Clara, who had been waiting a long while for them to have lunch, looked in horror at the knight's hands, which were full of wooden splinters. She sent the princess off to bathe, and then scolded her for being so obsessed with fencing. A handmaiden informed Dorothea that the local people were still sending vegetables to the castle to show their gratitude. The princess glanced out the window and saw a child drop a sack behind the bushes before sneaking out of the garden. Dorothea thought to herself that she would catch him next time and treat him to a meal. This time, more letters arrived from the capital, and the princess noticed that one of them was not for her. She called Stefan over, as the letter from the Order of Knights was addressed to him. The letter said there was a promotion exam, which could be an opportunity for Stefan to become a higher-ranking knight. This was good news, but it also meant that Stefan might have to leave Cerishian soon. Dorothea thought the exam was an excellent opportunity for the knight and asked him to let her see the letter. It said the exam date was fast approaching, so he would have to depart this week. The letter also mentioned that the imperial palace would no longer assign a personal knight to protect the princess. Dorothea told Clara not to worry, as the place they lived was very safe, and besides, Stefan had already taught her how to fence. After Clara left, Dorothea praised Stefan, saying it was a great opportunity for his promotion, as he had been stuck with her all this time. The princess wanted to give him a proper send-off and asked him to stay until the day after tomorrow. The knight knelt before the girl, and she repeated her request for him to stay a little longer. Stefan took the princess's hands, and after a short pause, he told her that he was her personal knight. He believed that staying by her side to protect her was his mission and his duty. Dorothea was moved, but she couldn't understand why she was surrounded by such fools who refused good opportunities and chose to suffer. But Stefan didn't think he was a fool for doing a job he enjoyed. Dorothea looked at him, remembering that before her rebirth, he had been the same way, defending Ray even when he had clearly lost. Thinking that Stefan had always been the type of person to make foolish choices, she wrapped her arms around his neck. She hugged her knight tightly, silently thanking him for making a choice that no one else would. Later that day, accompanied by Stefan, Dorothea went to the crowded town square. The princess couldn't see anything through the crowd, so the knight lifted her up. Now, looking over the heads of the people crowded against the wall, Dorothea saw an announcement for an amateur swordsmanship tournament. Registration began today, and the princess convinced Stefan to help her sign up. The guy in charge of registration started to mock Dorothea, but she didn't back down. Annoyed by her arguments, he accused her of being a spoiled brat. Hearing her parents insulted, Dorothea flew into a rage, barely managing to control herself. Just then, Stefan intervened to save the situation, slamming his sharp sword down on the table between the guy's hands. He told the bastard to follow the rules, and the guy, trembling like a leaf, handed the registration form to Dorothea. Once they were out of the tent, the princess happily thanked the knight for his help and suggested they head back to the castle. Meanwhile, two boys were crossing the square, one walking ahead and scolding the other, who was carrying a pile of boxes, telling him to call him young master, not brother. Suddenly, the boy dropped the boxes, and their contents shattered, which made the older one completely lose his temper. Dorothea heard the noise and turned around, deciding to do one good deed and help the boy before heading back. While picking up the shards, The boy cut his hand and cried out, and the princess recognized the voice as Eden's. Even more annoyed with his stepbrother, Jonathan raised his hand to strike Eden, but Dorothea stopped him, stepping between them and shielding the boy with her own body. Meanwhile, Stefan grabbed Jonathan's arm, who could only struggle furiously, trying to break free from the knight's iron grip. Satisfied with her good deed for the day, Dorothea extended a hand to Eden and helped him up from the ground. The furious boy, not knowing she was a princess, flew into a rage that she would dare to offend a duke's son. Having decided to be kind to others, Dorothea silently turned, grabbed Eden's wrist, and led him away. The princess thanked Stefan for his help, and the boy was moved by the princess's concern. Feeling a sense of loss when she let go of his hand, Eden decided to get the princess's attention again and called out. Dorothea looked back at him and noticed his swollen cheek, but he claimed it happened to him all the time. Eden asked the princess to stay with him until Jonathan was no longer angry. In this boy, Dorothea couldn't recognize the meek Eden of the past who used to swallow his grievances, and she invited him back to her castle. The moment the princess stepped over the castle threshold, she was met by an overjoyed Ray, who had missed his sister terribly and rushed out to greet her. Dorothea learned that the academy was on break, and the prince had taken the opportunity to visit her. Ray threw himself at her, giving her a big hug, and it was then that Dorothea noticed the prince hadn't come alone. Theon was standing right in front of her, making no effort to hide his excitement at finally seeing the princess. Dorothea called out his name in surprise, and he was delighted that she remembered him. A little way behind, Eden watched everything closely. Discovering that it was Ray who had invited Theon to come with him to Cerishion, Dorothea grabbed his hand and dragged him out of the room. Dorothea locked herself in her room, listening to her brother's excuses about missing her and wanting to surprise her. She scolded the prince for showing up uninvited and dragging Theon along, making a mess of things. Then she kicked him out. Raymond started to cry, upset that she didn't answer his letters and that he had been worried about her. Annoyed by Ray's tears, which once again made her look like the bad guy, Dorothea grabbed the doorknob to leave. But when she opened the door, she came face to face with Theon, who was worried about the princess's behavior. Dorothea couldn't take it anymore and bolted, despite Theon's attempts to stop her. But he caught up to her and grabbed her hand. Dorothea froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had waited so long for him to hold her hand, and now that he finally had, she didn't even dare to turn around, feeling unworthy. Theon asked for a minute of her time, apologizing for the unexpected visit and admitting that he had really wanted to see her. Still holding her hand, he knelt on one knee before the princess, saying he wanted to get along with her. Tears welled up in Dorothea's eyes, because in her past life, she had begged Theon to do this countless times, but he had remained indifferent. Suddenly, the silence between them was broken by Eden, who came up complaining that his cheek hurt. Dorothea apologized for forgetting her guest, took the boy's hand, and led him to get some medicine. As they left, Eden gave Theon a long look, and Theon stared right back into his eyes. Dorothea led the boy to a room and, after telling him to wait by the door, she went to a cabinet and rummaged through the medicine box. She mentally scolded herself for just leaving Theon like that after he had offered truce. Dorothea handed Eden a small vial of medicine, but he gave it back, saying she looked sick and needed it more than he did. The princess worried that he had noticed something between her and Theon, while Eden leaned in close and whispered that he liked her. Dorothea pushed him away, finding the joke not funny at all, and Eden commented that if she couldn't even laugh at that, she must be sick. She kicked the boy out of her room, and, in the hallway, he ran into Theon again. Aiden Bronte introduced himself and told him that the princess had personally applied medicine to his cheek. Theon Fried also introduced himself to Eden and was about to enter Dorothea's room, but Eden stopped him. He explained that the princess was very tired after her sword practice and a trip around town with Eden. To prove his closeness to the princess, to a surprise Theon, he mentioned that he saw her once or twice a week. The two boys locked eyes again, and Eden admitted he had said too much, bowed, and left. Dorothea sat in her room, sad that she had looked like a fool and couldn't even manage a smile for Theon after practicing for so long. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The princess wiped her tears, opened it, and saw Stefan. Dorothea invited him in, had him sit on the sofa next to her, and pleaded with him to listen to her. She told him she had a nightmare where she fell in love with a man who hated her so much that he ended up dying in her room. Dorothea confessed her fear that she was destined to be the villain, especially since she had also caused her own mother's death. Stefan suddenly grabbed her, pulled her close, and began to gently rub her back. The knight insisted that the princess was a good girl, and she immediately felt better and calmer. Dorothea nestled against his shoulder, thanked Stefan, and silently prayed for his forgiveness for killing him in her past life. Clara, who had been searching the entire castle for the princess, heard sobbing from behind a door. Thinking it was Dorothea, the handmaiden entered the room, only to find Ray, crying on the floor with his knees pulled to his chest. Raymond was sad because his sister had said his arrival was a disaster, and he felt that she hated him. It stung that he had only been worried and missed her, yet he looked like a fool in Dorothea's eyes. Clara tried to tell Ray he wasn't a fool, especially since he was studying at the best academy in the entire empire. The boy confessed that he was only ranked 80th out of 100 students, barely passing, and that he had no idea how to win Dorothea's favor. Clara, remembering that the princess hadn't even opened her brother's letters, racked her brain for a solution. She revealed that Dorothea loved fencing, and Ray decided to enter the tournament to get his sister's attention. Just then, Theon walked in, saying he had to leave the castle because the princess was ill. Clara was terrified and rushed off to check on Dorothea, leaving the two boys alone in the room. Theon felt he shouldn't have come, but Ray quickly took the blame. Just then, Theon's gaze fell upon the bedside table, where he saw the scarf he had given the princess at the emperor's reception. He had thought she would have thrown it away, but now, a glimmer of hope sparked within him. As night fell, a restless Dorothea went out onto the balcony for some fresh air, seeking a moment of peace. She gazed at the starry sky, fiddling with Theon's scarf and wondering if she should return it to him. Suddenly, a gust of wind snatched the scarf from her hands, and Dorothea couldn't catch it in time. The princess leaned over the railing and saw Theon in the garden below, picking up the fallen scarf. The girl, blushing furiously, rushed to explain that she was just about to return it to its owner. Dorothea finally smiled, and Theon complimented her smile and asked her to stay on the balcony. He checked the tree to make sure it was sturdy enough, then began to climb, getting closer and closer to the princess's balcony. Now he was sitting in the tree, his legs dangling face to face with Dorothea, thanking her for waiting for him. The girl could barely hold back her tears, because in her past life, it was always he who ran from her, and now he was thanking her for not running away. The princess reached out her hand and asked him to climb up, as it wasn't safe to sit on a branch, and she was worried about him. Theon was completely baffled by Dorothea, but he reached out his hand anyway and jumped from the tree onto the balcony. The boy sensed that the princess was a little uneasy around him, but she quickly told him he was mistaken. He admitted that he had missed her, but hadn't written because he thought she hated letters, and now he was glad to be here. Dorothea's heart was beating fast. It felt like a dream, especially thinking about how many times he had slipped away before. Theon confessed that he liked to be active at night, and thought it might be a trait of the Fried family. Dorothea remembered that he had always liked to stay up late and nap during the day. It was the same even back then. Theon wished the princess a good night and handed her the handkerchief he had found on the ground below the balcony. Dorothea thanked Theon. She had never received a gift from him before. Back in her bedroom, the girl clutched the handkerchief tightly. She was completely overwhelmed, but she pushed the thoughts aside, reminding herself that Theon belonged to Julia, a rule she had already written down in her notebook. The next morning, Dorothea was woken by Clara's screams when she discovered the princess had signed up for the tournament. The handmaiden tried not to reveal the true reason for her panic. She was worried that if Ray and Dorothea ended up dueling, it would be an utter disaster. It was time for the tournament, and the princess arrived at the square with Clara, Stefan, Ray, and Theon. The siblings looked at each other, realizing they were both there to compete, not to cheer each other on. Dorothea decided not to give up what she wanted just because of Ray, and she calmly prepared for the match. The princess saw from the list that her opponent was someone named Alex, and Clara was relieved it wasn't Ray. It seemed they had separated the contestants evenly so that the older ones would have a better chance of advancing. Since the Bronte family was hosting, Eden was also at the square, and he overheard the conversation between Dorothea and her handmaiden. When he heard that the princess's opponent was strong, he asked his father to rearrange the matches, pairing up children of similar builds. Eden said it was to make the tournament more exciting for the audience, and the Duke praised him for his initiative. Alex thought Dorothea had backed out because of his strength. Now that the matchups had changed, the princess was sure she could beat the braggart and challenge him on the field. Dorothea told the organizers not to change the bracket and to proceed as planned. The tournament began, and Raymond was the first to be called to the field. He was nervous and looked for his sister in the crowd. After seeing her, he waved, hoping for some support, but she completely ignored him. The signal sounded, the opponents faced each other, and Raymond picked up his weapon. Dorothea noticed the change in his eyes, which always happened at important moments, even though he usually acted like a clueless fool. Less than a minute into the match, Raymond had already knocked down his opponent and disarmed him. Dorothea ignored her brother's cheers and walked straight to the field, where her opponent was waiting. Eden, seeing that the bracket hadn't been changed, was worried. Alex was much bigger than her and could seriously injure her. The match began, and Dorothea stared at her surprised opponent, only wishing the sword in her hand was real. Taking advantage of his hesitation, she disarmed Alex, who was trembling all over, whether from anger or shock. Dorothea was declared the winner of the second round, and the amazed crowd murmured, wondering who she was. Theon, who had been watching with bated breath, couldn't take his eyes off the princess. Raymond marveled at Dorothea's skill, but she told him to keep their acquaintance quiet in public. The prince was dejected, and Theon came over, and the two boys talked about the possibility of a sibling showdown in the finals. They both advanced smoothly to the finals, and in the semifinals, the princess would face another newcomer, Joey. Dorothea looked at the boy, who was very eager to win, and thought he looked somewhat familiar. As the match began, the princess realized he was the boy who had been leaving vegetables at her castle gate. But his skills were not enough to defeat Dorothea, and he fell to the ground, frustrated at not getting the prize money. He was angry. That money could have sustained him for a whole month. He was even prepared to sell his life for it. Dorothea found this foolish and told Joey to come to her if he really needed to sell his life for money, adding that the potatoes he brought were delicious. And now we finally come to the final battle, Raymond versus Dorothea Milaneo. Standing before his sister, Ray offered to let her win by default, but Dorothea told him not to even think about going easy on her. The princess hated that everyone was so sure they would win, and she didn't want to appear weak in front of anyone. Clara didn't know who to root for. She was worried for both of her children. Dorothea felt a sharp pain as her hand was struck, but she immediately shook it off. Raymond was terrified that he had hurt his sister and apologized to her. Dorothea grew increasingly angry, demanding that the prince focus and continue the fight. Ray was at a loss. He couldn't continue to fight his sister like this. Seeing that he was about to forfeit, Dorothea threw down her sword and walked off the field. Ray excitedly chased after her, and the organizer followed close behind. He didn't see the tent's rope and tripped over it. The entire tent began to collapse, and a beam was heading right for Dorothea's head as she stopped to glare at Ray, who was chasing her. In the blink of an eye, it all happened too fast. The princess pushed her brother out of the way, and now she was on the ground, her right hand pinned by a massive wooden beam. Watching it all happen, Eden and Theon were horrified and rushed to help her. With her arm in a sling, Dorothea stood before Clara and Stefan, who were scolding her for being so reckless. She argued that it was more important to save the prince when they were both in danger, but Clara and Stefan believed the princess was the most important person to them. Dorothea thanked her loyal servants for saying so, moved by their concern. Just then, Raymond burst into tears, admitting that his visit was, just as his sister had said, a complete disaster. Theon came up from behind him and called his name, but Raymond was so lost in his sobs that he didn't hear. The boy decided to leave the prince alone and headed for the hall of the Bronte estate, where they had all gone to treat Dorothea's broken arm. Nearby, Eden was leaning against a pillar, his head in his hands, clearly deep in thought. Seeing Theon, he threw out his theory that Dorothea felt uncomfortable around him and suggested that he should leave. Theon felt Eden's malicious gaze and expressed his displeasure at his excessive concern for the princess. The boy didn't deny it, bluntly admitting that he had strong feelings for Dorothea. Bronte sarcastically pointed out that Theon should understand the feeling, since he had his own girl, Julia. Theon dismissed the rumor, claiming that he and Julia were just good friends. Dorothea thanked Duke Branny for his help during her treatment. As she was leaving the castle, she couldn't help but notice Eden's brother, George, bowing to her. Recognizing her, as the princess. Eden had much he wanted to say to Dorothea, but she walked straight past him without a single glance. The sun had already sunk below the horizon as the imperial carriage returned the prince and princess to the castle. Raymond apologized to his sister for getting hurt while saving him and begged her not to risk her life again. Dorothea realized that Ray could never be a good emperor because he was too kind, and that needed to change. Hearing her younger brother say he would do anything for her, the princess told him that from now on, he was to act on her command. Before bed, Clara told Dorothea that Theon would be leaving soon. And so, the girl lay in bed, unable to close her eyes. Understanding that she didn't know when she would see him again, she leaped out of bed. She threw a shawl over her shoulders, went out into the hallway, and ran into Theon, who had just finished packing for his departure. She struggled to keep the tremor out of her voice as she explained that she had come to say goodbye to him. He smiled and promised that the next time they met, he would be strong enough to protect her. She could barely recognize the Theon of the past, and happily promised to reply to all his letters. The boy was ecstatic, grinning from ear to ear as he bid the princess farewell. But just as Dorothea was about to leave, he suddenly called out to her, just to confirm that she and Eden were only friends. Realizing that Eden Bronte's feelings for the princess were unrequited, Theon left the castle with a light heart. Lying in bed, Dorothea wondered if everything she had seen was a dream or reality, and unknowingly drifted off to sleep. She dreamed of the past, of Eden whispering in her ear that she had every right to become the empress. He made her believe that she deserved the throne more than anyone, and that if she didn't act, there would be no second chance. On the day of her father's funeral, she went to the prince, the one the emperor had ordered her to protect. Knowing that people would judge her no matter what, she attacked her own brother, intending to kill her only blood relative. He told Dorothea to give up, as he was clearly stronger, but she didn't stop, piercing his heart with her sword. She thought he was such a fool for hesitating even then. And then he cried, calling her my dear before he died. Dorothea felt as if she was smiling, having finally obtained the throne, but tears streamed down her cheeks. The princess woke up, her mind in turmoil, reliving that nightmarish memory over and over again. She thought about how in today's duel, he had simply let her win, not fighting with all his might. She suddenly realized that perhaps back then, in the past, he had done the same thing, sacrificed himself for her. The creak of the opening door pulled Dorothea from her thoughts as someone entered the bedroom. The princess sat up in bed and saw Raymond standing at the door, worried that she couldn't sleep because of the pain in her arm. The boy walked to Dorothea's bedside and promised to stay with her until she fell asleep. He carefully tucked her in, telling her that he missed their mother very much. Unlike Raymond, Dorothea couldn't miss her, as she blamed herself for their mother's death. Raymond was angered by his sister's thoughts, as she believed that if she hadn't been born, he would have had both his parents. He was happy to have her as a sister and knew their mother wouldn't have regretted giving birth to her, because her death wasn't Dorothea's fault. The princess listened to Ray's words, once again thinking he was a fool, but she was still moved by his words. The prince asked Dorothea to go to Lampas with him, and when she refused, he asked to visit her again. The princess, with her back to her brother, promised she would think about it. Hearing snores from behind her, she sat up and saw Ray asleep with his head resting on the edge of the bed. She tried to wake him, but instead of leaving, he just sleepily fell onto the pillow next to her, so she covered him with the blanket. Dorothea gazed at her brother, who stirred up all sorts of emotions in her, now sleeping soundly beside her. Morning came, and Clara entered Dorothea's bedroom to wake her. Entering the room, she looked lovingly at the brother and sister sleeping side by side. All morning, Raymond ran errands for the princess, and she felt he had no self-respect at all. Suddenly, a thought crossed her mind, and she had Ray bring her paper and ink, asking him to write for her, since her hand hurt. Dorothea told him to start writing and dictated the history of the Milonio family, demanding he write down every word she said. The princess named one emperor after another, deciding to teach Raymond history this way. The sweating prince couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't helping Dorothea, but was diligently studying. He wrote non-stop, then suddenly stopped and excitedly asked if she had ever received his letters, since she had never once replied. When he guessed she found them boring, Dorothea replied that she liked being alone. The truth was, she hated being lonely, but she had always understood that if no one loves you, you have to get used to being by yourself. Ray's voice was filled with sadness as he asked the princess why she didn't like him, promising to do anything to improve. In winter love, Dorothea was fuming inside. Ray's damn kindness, the fact that only he could see the spirit of light and that he was surpassing her, all of it angered her. But what truly irritated her was that she had killed him in her past life, and only she was tormented by those chaotic memories. Recalling her 2 fights with Ray in the past and in the present, Dorothea asked her brother why he held back. He replied, "I didn't hold back. I didn't go easy on you. I was just worried about you, okay?" Dorothea admitted that what she hated most about him was that he was a good person and she was a bad one. The exhausted princess collapsed onto the bed, telling Ray they could start training again tomorrow. The prince leaned over her and promised that on the next exam, he would definitely place in the top 50 at the academy. Raymond was determined to prove to his sister that he wasn't a complete good-for-nothing and made a pinky promise. Meanwhile, at the Bronte estate, Jonathan grabbed Eden by the collar, furious that his brother hadn't told him the girl who defended him in the square was a princess. Eden grinned and brushed it off, "Man, I was picking up broken glass, all dizzy and out of it. I completely forgot to introduce you to Dorothea." Jonathan's mother burst in after hearing all the shouting and insults directed at Eden and stood up for the boy. She hugged him tightly and then dealt Jonathan a heavy blow. The party was canceled, even though all his friends had already been invited. With tears in his eyes, Eden begged his stepmother to let him visit the princess, after she was injured in the Bronte family duel. The lady, impressed by Eden's kind heart, told him he should bring the princess a gift. Clara was in the kitchen, desperately trying to make soup for the injured princess with her own hands. She took a sip, but felt something was missing. She started looking around at the kitchen staff, searching for someone to help her. Seeing Stefan coming out of the kitchen, she called out to him and asked him to taste the soup. The knight said it was delicious, and an excited Clara punched him on the arm, hitting him so hard that the soup spilled all over Stefan's shirt. The demoted maid promised to clean everything up and began desperately scrubbing the stain. Suddenly, Stefan jerked free, ran away from Clara, spun around in place a few times, and then slipped away, leaving the stunned maid in the kitchen. Dorothea was sunbathing on the balcony, gazing at the sea, completely lost in thought, thinking about how Eden had said he would drop by. Speak of the devil. Just then, Eden appeared, apologizing to the princess for being late. He was very worried that her injury would affect her swordsmanship. Feeling the cool evening breeze from the sea, the boy took off his own jacket and draped it over Dorothea's shoulders. The princess smelled the familiar floral scent that always seemed to linger around Eden Bronte. He handed her a gift, neatly wrapped in a package tied with a golden ribbon. Eden reminded her that she hadn't accepted his gift last time, so he opened the package himself, revealing a handkerchief embroidered with a sword. Dorothea thanked him, but then remembered she had a handkerchief just like it in her past life, and asked him where he got it. It turned out that Eden had it specially made for the princess because he knew she liked swords. Hearing her thanks, the boy became a little flustered and asked if Dorothea could do him a favor. Basically, he wanted her to let him sign her cast, and she agreed. He walked over, picked up a quill from the table, and wrote on her bandages the words he had been longing to tell Dorothea. He wrote that beautiful pearls are born from old wounds and shine brightest after the dark night. Dorothea realized she had fallen into his trap once again. She knew that he, Eden, had been so sure she would let him sign it. The boy grinned and asked the princess if he could visit her again soon. A month passed, and Dorothea was reading in her room, thinking how peaceful the castle was now that Ray was gone. Clara burst into the room and handed the princess a letter that had just arrived from the imperial palace. Dorothea learned that she had to fulfill her duty and meet someone from the royal family of Hark. The princess remembered that when she ascended the throne in her past life, she had killed Hark, but she couldn't recall why. Just then, a memory flashed through her mind. The reason she had done it was none other than Eden Bronte. Nereus Hark had a fiancée, Monica, whose family had arranged the marriage for political gain. But at her debutante ball, she, like many other girls, fell deeply in love with Eden, who was enjoying all the attention. Monica dumped Nereus, saying that even if she couldn't be with Eden, she wouldn't marry without love. And enraged, Nereus decided that Eden was the source of all his problems and would humiliate and mock him on sight. But Eden always fought back, saying Nereus couldn't keep his woman because he was a loser. After that, Nereus attacked the empire as soon as he ascended the throne, but Dorothea and Eden managed to stop him. Dorothea had never liked Hark, but things had to be different this time, so she planned to raise the Bronte family's prestige. The princess hoped that this time Eden and Nereus would get along, so that things wouldn't escalate into a war between empires. Deciding to act quickly, Dorothea ordered Clara to prepare a carriage so she could head to the Bronte estate. She and Eden discussed the upcoming visit from the Hark delegation over tea. The boy told her he planned to go with her to greet them, and Dorothea nearly choked. She had assumed they would hide Eden away like a dirty little secret. The boy wanted to ask his family to take him to the reception, since the prince from Hark was around his age. Dorothea didn't have a good feeling about this. Nereus wouldn't give the time of day to an illegitimate son who hadn't even attended the academy. Duke Brandy would regret showing Eden off, and the boy would be seriously hurt. Not knowing how to dissuade him, Dorothea blurted out that she had seen an astrologer who said that if Eden met anyone from Hark, his aura of death would get worse. Eden laughed, a little flustered, because, my goodness, the princess was asking an astrologer about him. Dorothea realized she had kind of messed up by blurting out that reason, but she couldn't think of anything smarter at the moment. Eden looked at the princess with a smug smile, trying to probe what else the astrologer had told her about him. He agreed to her request not to meet with the Hark family, but in exchange, he wanted to be her escort for her high society debut. Before her rebirth, Dorothea had never had an escort. At the Imperial Palace, being an escort was basically considered a punishment. So Ray ended up recommending his good friend Theon as her escort, and Theon simply couldn't refuse. It was then that Dorothea fell for him at first sight, which later caused a whole lot of trouble. Her thoughts drifted to Theon, remembering how Carnun had insisted on their engagement to forge a connection with the Freed family. Eden pressed her again, hoping Dorothea would promise to contact him on the day of her debut. The princess felt this was the best way and made a pinky promise to keep her word. Just a few days later, standing before Dorothea was Nereus Ponce from the Kingdom of Hark. Despite the guest's arrogant gaze, the princess tried to stay positive as she had a plan to smooth things over. Nereus just stood there silently, not moving, and the servants rushed to tell him that he was in the presence of the princess. But the guest just scoffed at Dorothea's inability to control spirits. The Ponce royal family had passed down the power of water spirits for generations, and they still maintained a strong connection to them. Nereus wouldn't call someone a princess who couldn't even handle a spirit and couldn't even get into episteme. Dorothea told him that it was she who didn't want to go there, not that she wasn't good enough. Her smooth talk proved she was much smarter than Nereus, even if she wasn't at episteme. They stared at each other with mutual hatred, trading barbs back and forth, neither willing to back down, all while drinking tea. Dorothea, calm as ever, began to educate Nereus on science, showing off her intellect. Not wanting to seem foolish, he brought up that episteme also taught military matters. Then Dorothea calmly proposed a sword fight, telling him to be a good sport if she won. Nereus was completely sure he would win, but almost immediately, Dorothea disarmed him. The princess mocked his skills, saying she had beaten him despite picking up a sword for the first time after a cast was removed. Furious, Nereus summoned a water spirit, and Dorothea was caught in a wild vortex, terrifying the servants. The water made it hard for the princess to breathe, and she was going crazy because her inability to summon a spirit could mean Yubera would be swallowed up by Hark at any moment. Driven by pure rage, Dorothea swung her sword and split the water stream. Nereus was stunned. How could the princess resist a spirit without any powers? Dorothea told the approaching Clara and Stefan she was fine, then got back on her feet. She strode up to Nereus and demanded he pick up his sword so they could continue their fight. He tried to justify himself, saying the power of spirits was just another way of fighting, but Dorothea didn't care that Nereus used them. Full of confidence, in a single moment, she disarmed him again and held her sword to his throat. Back in her room, the princess tried to calm a worried Clara while brushing her hair, telling her she was fine. But dark thoughts swirled in her mind. She didn't understand why she needed that victory. Did she really want to start trampling on others again? Just then, a worried Eden walked in, having apparently heard what happened. Dorothea said everything was fine, but she couldn't stop fearing that Hark would annex Yubera because of that water spirit. Eden was worried because the princess always said she was fine, but her expression screamed that it was all nonsense. To cheer Dottie up, the boy offered to play the violin for her, and everyone was stunned by his skill. Suddenly, a knock on the door interrupted the impromptu concert, and the princess recognized Nereus's voice. She jumped up, grabbed Eden's hand, and pushed him behind the curtains, telling him not to move because he had promised to stay away from Ponce. Nereus didn't even wait for an invitation, pushing past Clara and bursting into Dorothea's room. He checked her over to make sure she wasn't hurt, and the princess told him to get to the point. Nereus apologized for using his power on a commoner who couldn't control spirits, and Dorothea, barely containing her emotions, accepted the apology and told him to get lost. The uninvited guest presented an invitation from his father for the princess to join them for dinner that night. Duke Brandy would also be there. Dorothea didn't want to go, but you can't just refuse a king, so she told Clara to get everything ready for her to go out. Nereus wondered who was playing the violin before he arrived, but Dorothy said he must have been hearing things and hurried off. Ponce glanced at Stefan, who was standing motionless by the curtains, and said he'd follow shortly after taking care of something. Sitting at the table with her guests, the King of Hark tried to smooth things over after the incident between his son and the princess. He hoped Dorothea would understand and mentioned that she was becoming more and more like Empress Alice. The princess had seen a portrait of her mother, who came from a branch of the Fried family, and she had liked the woman in the painting. Leaving the estate, Dorothea was annoyed by the king's words, which implied that even though the princess had recovered, she wasn't being invited to the capital. Suddenly, she remembered the supplies Joy brought her every month and realized she hadn't heard from him in 2 months. Just as she was thinking of him, wondering if something had happened, he came running towards the princess. Stefan pushed the brash boy away from Dorothea, but he didn't give up, demanding to speak with the princess. He knelt before her and begged for help, saying she had promised to help if he ever had to sell his life. So, I got into the princess's carriage and told her that my father owed a debt to the mayor, and now my brother and I were going to be dragged off to the mines. I was scared for my brother, and the princess said she would help us, but she had one condition. Dorothea found the mayor and handed him a chest full of gold bars. The guy said, "Whoa, there's way more money in here than you owe." Dorothea told him to use the extra money to pay off the debts of all the children working in the mines and to stop using child labor altogether. Before my rebirth, when I tried to ban child labor, everyone came down on me. I'm not the empress anymore, so I don't have the power to do that, but I hope I can at least help a few people. Joy was shocked that the princess accompanied him to pick up his brother. They set off with Stefan because who knew what kind of trouble they might run into. Dorothea looked around in horror, taking in the impoverished area she had never been to before. Everyone around was staring at them, because even in simple clothes, the girl didn't look like she was short on money. The princess was shocked at how people could live in shacks made of nothing but crooked planks. They opened the door and saw a terrified little boy, Joy's brother Poe, sitting on the floor. When he heard they were leaving this place, the child jumped happily into his brother's arms. Joy told his brother they were abandoning their father and told Poe to say hello to the princess. Dorothea gave the frail child a kind smile, and he just looked back at her with his big, green eyes. Just then, there was shouting from outside, and Poe ran to his brother in fear as Dorothea turned to see what was happening. In the doorway stood a bruised, toothless guy, yelling at Stefan and demanding the uninvited guests leave his house. Dorothea was furious with this guy who was ready to sell his children to the mines, and she told him she was taking them. She grabbed Joy's hand and urged them out the door, away from that scumbag. Back at the estate, Dorothea ordered the children to be bathed and changed into new clothes. The princess reminded the ecstatic children that she had bought them, and in exchange for paying off their debt, they had to work for her. She told them to follow her, as she had a job for them. The boys were led to the dining room, where a lavish table was set, adorned with flowers. The children stood frozen, having never seen such a magnificent sight. The princess told them to sit, and as all sorts of dishes were served, the boys' eyes widened. Dorothea intended to teach them table manners, so that Joy and Poe could serve her. Joy was a little scared. He didn't know what the princess would make them do. She might be just like Count Duncan and put them a hard labor. But looking closely at Dorothea's calm face, he decided she was actually very kind. Joy smiled and told the princess his favorite food was apple pie and promised he would definitely buy her one someday. As a thank you. Back to the etiquette lesson, the children devoured everything on their plates and thanked the princess. Suddenly, the dining room doors opened and a servant pushed in a dessert cart covered with a silver cloth. It was apple pie, which the princess had specially requested to reward the children for their hard work in learning etiquette. But Joy was sullen, embarrassed by Dorothea's kindness and frustrated that he had wanted to give her an apple pie first. The princess comforted him explaining that her staff needed to be neat and healthy, and for now, their job was to eat well and get stronger. Dorothea wrote all about this in a letter to Theon, who couldn't help but smile at her kindness as he read it. He sat down at his desk and reached for the ink, eager to reply to her letter, but his hand wouldn't obey. It was trembling, his heart was pounding, and Theon's body just wouldn't listen. He was terrified, not knowing what was happening. Eden came to visit the princess. Clara escorted him, and the maids around them whispered about how handsome he was as he walked down the hall. He overheard Dorothea scolding someone for hiding a pie in their room. Eden opened the door and saw Dorothea snatching a moldy pie from two children who were too poor to throw it away. After Clara told him where the children came from, Eden greeted the princess and told her. Dorothea discreetly took her leave, leaving Joy and Poe alone with him. They recognized him as the person from the fencing competition. The two boys were talking about how wonderful Dorothea was and how they were learning the alphabet and history in the castle. Eden said, "No way. I can't believe you two are just leeching off the princess like this." Joy retorted, "Hey, I'm not the type to just sit around and wait for handouts, okay? I just don't know how to repay Dorothea." Eden patted the boy's shoulder in a friendly manner and said he had an idea about that. Dorothea was leisurely drinking tea with Eden in the guest room when Joy and Poe appeared, looking embarrassed. They produced a basket of berries from behind their backs, saying they had picked them especially to make the princess happy. The girl blushed as she accepted the gift. She hadn't asked them to do any work, but it warmed her heart that they had thought of her. Suddenly, Dorothea noticed the basket was lined with Theon's handkerchief, which was now completely stained with berry juice. The princess flew into a rage, scolding the two boys for taking someone else's things without permission, especially since this handkerchief meant a great deal to her. A startled Poe started to cry, telling Dorothea it was Eden's idea to bring her something sweet. Joy was angry because Eden had told him to find something to put under the berries, but he claimed he didn't think they would take something of Dorothea's. The princess asked the two boys to step outside for a moment. As he left, Joy shot a harsh glare at the smirking Eden. But as soon as the door closed, Dorothea gave Eden a hard slap across the face. She looked him straight in the eye, knowing exactly what had happened. Eden feigned a surprised expression, but Dorothea suddenly realized that the two of them were the same as they had always been. She had wanted to guide Eden onto the right path, but she couldn't even control herself. Before her rebirth, he had a peculiar habit of deliberately dropping his things and then enjoying the feeling of superiority as he watched noble ladies bend down to pick them up for him. Some ladies would collect his handkerchiefs as souvenirs, and he would only mock them for it. Dorothea was the first to discover this strange habit of his, and thus began their twisted relationship. Their sick bond was deep-rooted, a tyrant queen and her right-hand man who encouraged her to be worse. The seeds of disaster were sown back then, and it all culminated in the tragedy of Raymond's murder. She tried to persuade Theon, who was sobbing over the body, telling him that she was the Empress now. The way she looked then was as if to say, "Darling, now you will sit by your queen's side and ascend to the throne." But the people wouldn't have it. A ruthless person who murdered her own family ascending the throne? No way. She slaughtered everyone who opposed her, but it was Theon of all people who declared her insane. Ever since Raymond's murder, she couldn't sleep, panicked day and night from everyone's hatred. But Eden was always by her side, constantly telling her that the people were just stuck in their old ways. Theon turned his back on Dorothea, but Eden swore he would always be by her side to take care of her. Meanwhile, Theon constantly wrote letters to Julia, and his face would always be wreathed in smiles whenever a new one arrived. Dorothea trembled with rage. She had so much more than Julia, yet Theon had never once smiled at her. She even decided to build a new palace for Theon, just to win his favor, but even that was no use. Dorothea discovered that Theon found her both pathetic and detestable. She went mad with rage, feeling her jewels were the only beautiful things about her, and in her fury, tore off an earring, ripping her ear. Eden rushed in, horrified to see her bleeding ear, and hurried to help Dorothea. Just then, it was announced that Theon wished to see the Empress, and she turned, hoping he had finally come to her with love. But Theon was furious. He had discovered that Dorothea had stripped the Delavigny family of their title and banished them from the capital. Dorothea begged her husband to lose interest in Julia, while Eden just watched silently from the side. After listening to Theon's furious speech about how much Julia meant to him, Dorothea slapped him hard across the face. Theon declared that he never swore to be hers, then turned and left, with Dorothea rushing after him. But Eden stopped her, advising her that she would only hurt her husband's feelings and needed to wait. He pulled Dorothea close, promising that one day, everything she desired would be in her arms. The Empress gave Theon everything she had, but the more she gave, the deeper his indifference grew. One day, as Dorothea was again pondering how to win Theon's heart, Eden came to see her. He had come to tell her that Julia was dead, that she had an accident while wandering alone without a guard. Dorothea thought that perhaps Eden had killed Julia for her, but she didn't care. She was already running to Theon, because now there were no more obstacles between them. The Empress found her husband in the garden, his head bowed, cupping a dead bird in his hands, with tears in his eyes. He turned to Dorothea and asked if she still loved him. In any case, Dorothea knelt before her husband and swore that she still loved him. As tears streamed down her face, Dorothea begged Theon to believe that she had nothing to do with Julia's death. Theon grabbed the Empress's hands and told her that it was her greed that had ruined him. Not long after, he took his own life, and his ghost haunted Dorothea, making it impossible for her to properly handle state affairs. In the end, the Empress who had dragged the country into chaos and slaughtered countless people was sentenced to death. Before the execution, Eden approached Dorothea and asked for her last words. He knelt before her on one knee, wanting her to beg him to save her, but Dorothea refused. Without Theon, her life no longer had any meaning. Eden was furious. He couldn't understand what was so special about Theon that the Empress couldn't forget him, even in the face of death. Dorothea just smiled and asked Eden to become a kind hero, because the only role she could ever play was that of a villain. Eden stared at her, took a crystal from his staff, and offered it to the Empress, but she just turned her head away. The next moment, an axe flashed above Dorothea's head, and the Empress was beheaded. As she died, she thought that not a single person in the world loved her, and if she had known it would end like this, she would have rather ended her own life sooner. Now, Dorothea stood there, fists clenched and trembling, not understanding why all these memories were flooding back to her at this moment. But one thing was certain. She and Eden were too alike, which meant they would only bring out the worst in each other. By staying near Eden, Dorothea was afraid she would succumb to greed and walk the path of evil again. Eden apologized for his mistake and held the princess tightly, refusing to let go. He told her not to cry, but tears were streaming down his own face. Dorothea pushed him away, thinking this apology was just another mask, because he had never apologized in her past life. Eden regretted what he did, explaining it was out of jealousy, wanting to be the princess's only friend. He was afraid Dorothea would abandon him if she made other friends, but the princess wasn't sure how much she could trust him. The emperor was listening to a report about the Heart delegation's successful visit to Serishan and how impressed they were with the princess. The reporter also told him about Dorothea's progress in fighting the infection, her charitable donations, and how intelligent she had become. The emperor heard that the princess had mostly recovered and had even participated in a fencing competition. Karnan ordered Dorothea to be brought back to the imperial palace and decided to send her to take the entrance exam for episteme. He believed this exam would prove whether the princess was as smart as everyone said. Stefan was in the garden polishing his sword, reminiscing about the years he had spent by the princess's side. In Cerithian, he remembered seeing Dorothea for the first time when he and the other knights found her in the desert. When he saw the princess again at the estate, she didn't recognize him, but he clearly remembered her clinging tightly to his thin arm in the desert. So, when they were formally introduced, he didn't dare to shake her hand, afraid his strength would crush her small palm. When the princess first asked me to teach her swordsmanship, I was thrilled, finally no longer having to train alone. And seeing how quickly she learned, I realized how exciting it was to be a teacher. I thought Dorothea was a smart, motivated, and strong child, as if blessed by the gods, making it impossible not to care for her. But one day, she told me about her nightmares, and I realized this girl would never feel love. After all, she had caused her own mother's death at birth. Empress Alice had bled to death while giving birth to Dorothea, and the doctor who barely managed to save the child drowning in blood was said to have been beheaded for it later. I don't know who told Dorothea this awful business. She never needed to know, because now she was completely consumed by guilt. I wish I could be as warm and approachable as Clara. I have a hard time finding the right words to comfort the princess. Suddenly, there was a rustle in the bushes. I stood up and saw Joy, who was scared out of his wits. The boy sat down next to me and started asking me about how to become a knight. Joy wanted to be a knight too, but he felt he had little hope due to his lowly birth. Stefan listened to the boy with a somber expression, lost in thought, then asked if he really wanted to become a knight. Joy was very excited and told Stefan he was serious. He thought dying on the battlefield was way cooler than toiling in the mines. Besides, the boy felt that if he became a knight, he could repay the princess for saving his life. The scene cuts to Stefan telling Dorothea he wants to train Joy and asking for her permission. After she agreed, Stefan asked the princess if she would continue her fencing lessons. But Dorothea thought becoming strong was too dangerous. When she held a sword, all she wanted was to win, to conquer. She clenched her fists, not even looking at Stefan, and said she was quitting, making up a lame excuse about it being boring. The knight watched the girl hurry out of the room with a sad look on his face. The head chef was yelling at Poe for loitering in the kitchen, saying that if he was hungry, all he had to do was ask. But Poe wasn't hungry. He wanted something else, but he was too shy and embarrassed to ask. The head chef leaned closer to the boy so he could whisper his idea in his ear. The head chef was very excited after hearing it, praised Poe's idea, and promised to do everything he could to help him. Eden was lying on the bed in his room, crying his eyes out because the princess was angry with him and refused to see him. He wanted to do something to make Dorothea happy, and suddenly, a brilliant idea flashed through his mind. In Sarishan, there was a flower that only glows at night and couldn't be found anywhere else, and people came from all over to find them. Eden decided to go find this flower. It was already late, and he regretted not bringing a servant, but he shook his head because he had to do this alone, so the princess would be happy because of him alone. Finally, Eden found a flower growing on a steep, rocky slope. Dorothea clutched Theon's handkerchief, thinking that even though Eden had apologized, she still didn't want to see him right now. There was a knock on the door, and Clara appeared with a maid from the house of Bronte, who was looking for the boy. Dorothea learned that he had gone to find a flower for her and had not yet returned. Eden was climbing the cliff, grabbing onto sharp rocks. Almost there. He made one last effort, grabbed the flower stem, pulled it out, and gazed at them in awe. Suddenly, his boots slipped, and before he could react, Eden fell from the cliff. A frantic Dorothea and Stefan entered the woods to find Eden, calling his name over and over. It was pitch black around them when suddenly, the princess noticed a light behind some bushes in the distance. She approached and pushed the bushes aside to see Eden sitting on the ground, wiping away tears with one hand and holding the flowers in the other. He saw Dorothea and turned away, not wanting her to see him in such a dirty and disheveled state. The princess used her sleeve to wipe the dirt from Eden's face, realizing she had been so caught up in the past that she had never truly seen him. She didn't care at all what he looked like now, because he had risked his life to pick that flower for her. Dorothea wove one of the flowers into her hair, realizing she cared about Eden's inner beauty, not his appearance. She then tucked the other flower behind the boy's ear and happily thanked him for his gift. For days, Joy and Poe had been avoiding Dorothea, flinching and running away whenever their eyes met. Just then, there was a knock on the princess's door. It was Joy and Poe, with Poe holding a plate of apple pie as an apology for their actions. Joy kept his promise and handed the princess the pie that the chef had helped the brothers bake. Dorothea was overjoyed with the pie, as no food had ever brought her as much joy as something made just for her like this. She thanked the two boys, who jumped for joy at having made the princess happy, just as someone walked in. Dorothea turned to see an imperial knight who had come to deliver Carnun's orders. The princess was informed that since her health had been restored, the emperor commanded her to return to the capital. Dorothea was so upset she dropped the pie, because everyone she cared about was in Sarisha. The princess told the emperor that she would remain at the estate until Joy and Poe baked her a new pie. Raymond snuck up on Theon in the hallway and jumped on his shoulders. The boy was caught off guard and shoved him away, not even realizing it was his good friend. Ray noticed Theon's hands were shaking badly and was worried, especially because he had skipped history class. Julia appeared in the hall and called out to Theon, and the two of them stepped aside to talk privately. Ray could tell something was on his friend's mind, but hoped it wasn't anything serious and that Theon would tell him about it soon. Over tea, Julia pointed out that Theon looked exhausted today. He told her he had gone for a walk at dawn, but everything suddenly went dark, and the bird he was watching just dropped dead. He grabbed his hair, realizing it was his fault that he had accidentally killed the bird. Theon grabbed his hair again, trembling all over, and Julia rushed his side. He apologized, calmed down, and confided his worries to Julia, not understanding where this power was coming from. The strange symptoms appeared without warning. At first, it was just a faint glimmer in the dark, but gradually, this power of the dark elves grew stronger, first killing small insects, and now even a small bird couldn't escape its fate. In the Freed family, who had a pact with the dark elves, no one had gained this power for nearly 100 years, and now, feeling it awaken within him, Theon was afraid he would hurt someone. Julia comforted him, saying that generations had passed and the Freed family's bloodline had thinned considerably, so Theon wouldn't become powerful enough to hurt anyone. Julia suggested he tell Ray everything too, since Ray could control light elves and might be able to help Theon. But he had already asked Ray about this power and found out that the prince could communicate with the spirit from the very beginning. But Theon's case was different. The spirit appeared, did as it pleased, and then disappeared. Furthermore, controlling a spirit required a high affinity with it, which Theon didn't have. The boy remembered that the power had taken control of him just as he was about to write a letter to Dorothea. He hoped to learn to control this power before he met the princess again. Clara was telling Dorothea about a letter she had received, an invitation to a party at Countess Duncan's house. The princess also learned that there would be some new people making their debut in high society. At lunch, an idea occurred to Duke Bronte. He had noticed that Princess Dorothea was quite infatuated with his illegitimate son. He knew the princess had been turning down visits from other noblemen her age, but always had time for Eden. The Duke thought it would be a golden opportunity if his son of low birth could start a scandal with the princess. He yelled at a maid to fetch the Duchess at once, so he could discuss his brilliant idea with her. After all, an illegitimate son and a princess unloved by her own father could make for a formidable power couple. Before the Duchess could appear, the Duke had already stormed off to find her himself. The Duchess was furious when she heard her husband plan to parade Eden in high society just because Princess Dorothea was infatuated with him. She felt utterly humiliated, as the Duke was essentially announcing to the world that he had gotten a barmaid pregnant, had a child with her, and was now raising him as his own son. She swore she had always treated the boy as her own son, and having him accepted was enough to repay her debt. She would do no more. Bronte thought Eden was old enough to face the world, and felt the Duchess was just worried about Jonathan's position. The Duchess was convinced she would die of shame if she introduced her husband's child with another woman into society. She told her husband that she found Eden lovely, but she could never bring herself to love the boy. Just then, a teacup shattered on the floor. It was Eden who had dropped it, having overheard the entire argument. The boy froze for a moment, then rushed out of the room, ignoring his father's calls from behind. When the Duke reached his son's room, he found him crying, upset that his parents were ashamed of him. Bronte tried to comfort Eden, who couldn't understand why they were hiding him and arguing over him. He thought it was all because he had disappointed them by failing to get into the Episteme Academy. He had begged the Duchess to take him to the exam, and she finally agreed, but they had an accident on the way and didn't make it in time. Eden felt it wasn't his fault his mother was of low birth, so he didn't understand why everyone was always arguing about it. The Duke told the boy it wasn't his fault at all and promised to formally introduce him as his son at Countess Duncan's party. The boy knew his father, and the Duchess did care for him, and the Duke realized he had paid too little attention to this child who had grown up too fast. Princess Dorothea walked into the Countess's mansion, and in an instant, everyone flocked to her, flooding her with compliments. She already regretted coming. Duke Bronte pulled her out from the chattering ladies to greet her and pay his respects. Eden suddenly emerged from behind him, and the princess was completely stunned to see him. She was confused because, before her rebirth, Eden had only appeared in high society after Jonathan died in a hunt. Dorothea couldn't understand what kind of change of heart Duke Bronte had, as they had kept him hidden until now. The princess was excited for Eden's debut and sincerely congratulated him on his first public appearance. The boy was relieved to see Dorothea here, as he had been nervous and didn't know how to act around all these strangers. The princess was confident Eden would fit in, but his father was calling him over as the event was about to start. Eden kissed the princess's hand, apologizing for having to leave her alone in the crowd. Dorothea overheard the ladies whispering, judging the Duke while praising Mrs. Bronte's generosity. But Dorothea knew that soon everyone would be scrambling to get close to him. In her past life, his influence over the elite was staggering. Seriously, ball attendance depended on whether Eden would be there, and that became his power. Countess Duncan was worried about finding a replacement when she learned a musician was injured and couldn't perform. Eden, who happened to overhear, volunteered to play the piano. The boy apologized for his presumption and introduced himself as the younger son of the Bronte family. The Countess smiled and asked if Eden could play Beethoven, as the piece was difficult for an average person. Eden insisted he practice the piece every day and begged Lady Duncan to give him a chance. Dorothea was bored, sipping juice and wondering where on earth Eden had gone. Suddenly, the chatter of the crowd died down, and she turned to see Eden sitting at the piano. The piece was mesmerizing, and she felt as if he were playing just for her, hoping she would hear it. Dorothea thought that perhaps Eden would be happier as a musician than a minister, but he was far too ambitious. Everyone applauded the young genius, who spotted the princess waving frantically in the crowd. Dorothea went out to the balcony for some peace and quiet, only to hear ladies gossiping about Eden waving at her. She was angry at people being nosy, saying they were a match made in heaven, just as Eden walked over. Dorothea was sure their conversation was not innocent. Their combination was perfect, as the abandoned Milanello and the illegitimate Bronte were two geniuses who couldn't shine brightly. Now, the ladies were whispering that the princess couldn't summon a spirit and predicting that the palace was nearing its end. Suddenly, a glass of bright red, super sticky juice was poured from somewhere on the balcony onto one of the ladies. They looked up and found Eden Bronte, who was apologizing for accidentally knocking over the glass he hadn't placed securely on the railing. Eden said that the Freed family hadn't been able to summon a dark spirit for over a century, yet they still held power, which meant that if someone from the Milanello family couldn't summon a spirit, it wouldn't lead to the fall of the empire either. Dorothea clenched her fists, telling Eden to stop, as she believed a Milanio who couldn't see spirits didn't count as a Milanio at all. The ladies bowed and took their leave, saying they only pitied the princess for being abandoned in a remote place and not being recalled to the imperial palace for years. The princess walked away, assuring the ladies they didn't need to pity her, as she wasn't miserable enough to need anyone's sympathy. A few feet away from the high society gossipers, Eden smashed a cup on the ground and then followed the princess. Dorothea hoped to return to the people who cared for her, Stefan, Clara, Joy, and Poe, but her path was blocked by a knight who appeared out of nowhere, announcing that the royal carriage had arrived. He read out Carnun's order, stating that the princess had recovered and therefore must return. Dorothea realized that if she refused, she would once again be labeled as rebellious, so she requested at least some time to prepare. The knight had to obey the order without hesitation, but Dorothea pleaded for a little time to say her goodbyes. The princess knew that, except for Clara, everyone she cared about was trapped in Salcedon. She was very worried about Joy and Poe. Dorothea asked for a few minutes to hastily write a few letters for Clara and the boys. Eden walked in, offering to personally deliver the letters to the castle for the princess. The boy told Dorothea not to worry, that he would handle anything she entrusted him with without any problem. The princess thought to herself that Eden wouldn't mess up this time and asked him to give the letter to Clara. Eden congratulated the princess on returning to Lampas and told her not to say goodbye, as if it were a final parting. Dorothea took a step closer with a smile, promising that they would definitely meet again. Eden reminded her about the debutante ball, where he would be her partner, and promised to count down the days in waiting. Without letting Dorothea leave, Eden pulled her over, held her tightly, and kissed her forehead one last time. Raymond was restless and uneasy, feeling that Theon was hiding something. He was convinced his friends were all smitten with Julia and were abandoning him. As he walked upset down the hallway, with a sudden bang, he heard the sound of breaking glass coming from an open door. Ray kicked the door open and saw Theon collapsed on the floor, trembling like a leaf and looking completely broken down. The prince rushed to his friend, who pleaded with him to help him learn to control his spirit at will. Dorothea returned to the castle for the first time in 3 years, but nothing had changed, not the castle, and not Karnan. The emperor thought it was time for the girl to return to the castle for good, but Dorothea found it pointless. Karnan promised that if his daughter passed the entrance exam for Episteme Academy, he would change his opinion of her. The old Dorothea would have gladly accepted and studied desperately, but now she found it pointless and refused. The furious emperor hadn't intended to give Dorothea a choice anyway, and ordered her to take the exam. The princess agreed to take the exam, but refused the tutor the emperor arranged for her. Lying in her room, Dorothea was thinking about how important doing well on those exams once was, and how meaningless it was now. Raymond burst through the door, almost excitedly, and rushed towards his sister, but she pushed him away, as usual. The prince handed Dorothea a bouquet of flowers as a welcome gift. Ray was very excited that his sister was going to Episteme Academy, already imagining them going together and him introducing her to his friends. Dorothea started nagging her younger brother again, saying he should be studying instead of bothering her with such trivial matters. Panicked by the princess's sudden summons to the capital, Clara was running around like a headless chicken. While packing their bags, Joy and Poe were upset to hear that Dorothea was leaving, as they would have to go back to their father. Poe buried his face in his brother's chest and cried, not wanting to go back. Eden found them amidst the chaos, having come to fulfill the princess's request. He gave Clara a letter, and after reading it, she was amazed by the princess's cleverness and kindness. The boys found out that Dorothea had also ordered them to go to Lampa's with Clara. Eden jealously clenched his fists, said his goodbyes, and refused Clara's offer to stay for some snacks. The boy walked away, but Joy and Poe caught up with him in the hall, thanking him for delivering the letter and apologizing for being angry with him earlier. Eden pointed out how lucky the children were and ordered them to try not to bring shame upon the princess. Then he left. A month later, Dorothea stood in Karnan's office, with exam papers scattered on the floor around her. The emperor was furious that the princess had scored a 0, a score never before seen in the academy's history. Dorothea assured her father that she had done her best, as she had set an unprecedented record. She accused the emperor of caring more about his wife's death than his daughter's birth, saying she had never received a single gift from him. Unable to bear the princess, implying he wished his daughter had died instead of his wife, Karnan yelled at her. Dorothea asked the emperor if he had wished for her death when she was kidnapped years ago, and received a resounding slap for the question. The princess accused him of never having hugged her, saying it was because he didn't see her as his own child. She told him to stop calling her Princess Milanio, as that name had brought her no good fortune. Before leaving, Dorothea also demanded that he remove her from the guest list for events and ceremonies. The girl left the room, excited that things turned out this way, because now even her father's last bit of attachment to her was also gone. Stefan rushed to Dorothea, horrified when he saw the red mark on her cheek, but she insisted she was fine. But then, with a sudden break, she burst into tears, saying she didn't want to stay in the capital anymore and wanted to return to the castle by the sea. Stephen held Dorothea tightly as she cried inconsolably, wanting only to disappear from this world. Now she was sobbing on his shoulder, begging him to take her away from there. The princess's eyes were swollen from crying, and the slap mark was still stinging, but she smiled and thanked Stefan for being with her. The knight smiled and patted the girl's head, and she already felt much calmer. They ran into Theon on the way, who called out to the princess and started a conversation. Dorothea felt very embarrassed, having appeared before Theon in such a state once again. After Dorothea assured him she was fine, he took a tube of ointment from his pocket and told her to apply it to her cheek. The princess took the medicine, thanked Theon for his help, said goodbye, and walked away. Watching her leave, the boy wondered who had hit Dorothea and, worried for her, decided to find out. But just then, the dark power emerged again, and Theon's whole body began to tremble, so he decided to be careful in front of people. Dorothea looked at the ointment Theon had given her, but for some reason, she started thinking of Eden. She wanted to write him a letter and tell him what had happened, because Eden always listened to her stories like a very close friend. Dorothea picked up a mahogany box and admired what was inside. She decided to include a bookmark in the letter, one she had made from the flowers Eden had given her, wanting to encourage him with it. So, was the princess going to write about her pathetic and lonely life in the palace? Or about how her only family wished she were dead? She felt it was pointless, so she changed her mind and slammed the jewelry box shut. Eden was crouching in the garden, sulking because he hadn't heard from the princess. He was jealous of the guys who went to Olympus to see her, as he already missed Dorothea like crazy. Recalling the princess's words, Karnun thought that he never wished for her death. What father would want his daughter to be killed by kidnappers? But honestly, if he could have saved Alice on the day Dorothea was born, even if it meant the girl's life, he would have. Every time Karnun looked at his daughter, he was reminded of his wife dying in his arms, and he just couldn't bring himself to feel anything for her. He was thinking that Dorothea bore a striking resemblance to her mother, and perhaps he could start to feel something for her. It was just that the girl couldn't summon spirits, which put the royal family in danger. The emperor was furious that the child Alice had given her life for couldn't even summon a single spirit. Raymond was very upset that Dorothea had messed up the academy entrance exam. He told Theon that she had gotten the worst score in history, a big fat 0. The boys believed the princess didn't fail because she was stupid. No, she was too smart and had done on purpose. Theon shared the good news that he was getting better at suppressing his power, so he was less worried about hurting people. But Raymond was worried that if Theon kept suppressing the dark spirit, it might destroy him. The dark spirit was connected to death, and the more Theon suppressed it, the less life force he had. Raymond had pulled out some old books in the royal library and done some research. He showed Theon the story of how the first Millennium and the first Frisia made a blood pact with the spirits. The Millennium king made a wish with the spirit of light to create the sun, while Frisia made a pact with the spirit of darkness to draw a veil against the sunlight. After learning that light and darkness were originally one, and that the two families counterbalanced each other to stabilize their powers, Ray offered Theon his hand. The prince swore to find a way to stabilize their powers so that the spirit of light could suppress the spirit of darkness. Clara, holding a large bundle of things, hurried towards the princess, as the move was taking longer than she had expected. The maid didn't see Stefan in her path and crashed right into him, sending boxes flying everywhere while she landed in the knight's arms. Dorothea came out to greet them, frustrated that she hadn't had time to prepare for their arrival. Clara rushed to hug the princess, noticed a mark on her cheek, and told her to put some medicine on it as soon as possible. Joy and Poe were also worried about Dorothea's appearance, and they scrambled to ask her what had happened. It was then that the girl realized it wasn't about returning to Salsaton, but about the people who cared for her. She greeted them happily, because now her home was wherever these people were. Everyone, including Stefan, rushed to hug the princess, who was thrilled to be surrounded by her loved ones again. Sipping tea, Dorothea thought how wonderful it was that everyone had come, as she felt very uncomfortable around Karnun. Joy and Poe ran over to ask what they could do to help, but Dorothea just told them to resume their usual lives, as long as they didn't go to the other palaces and minded their manners. Then Theon and Raymond came in, Raymond having come to support his sister, whom he had been worried about lately. Theon praised Dorothea, and she realized that his friendliness actually made the memory of his death fade a little. Raymond noticed the two children standing aside and asked his sister who they were. The boys were panicked that the crown prince was talking to them, but Ray was very easygoing, not at all like one would imagine a prince to be. Dorothea realized that maybe this wasn't so bad. She had always been jealous of how radiant he was and how much everyone loved him. Time fast forwards to when Dorothea is 16. She was walking the garden when she suddenly heard Clara calling her name. The maid ran up to the princess, out of breath, and asked if she could take a few days off. It turned out that Clara's father, who had been ill for several years, had passed away that morning. Dorothea offered her condolences and regretted not knowing sooner, so she could have given Clara more time with her sick father. Clara was touched by her mistress's kindness and understanding, but Dorothea didn't get it. She knew nothing about her maid's life. The princess ordered for help to be arranged for Clara's funeral and for a wreath to be sent in Dorothea's name. But she then found out that royal wreaths were only sent for high-ranking ministers. Dorothea ordered the wreath to be sent anyway and planned to attend the funeral herself to be with Clara, who had taken care of her all these years. Dorothea didn't care about appearing in the slums. She couldn't abandon someone important to her. In her difficult time, Clara was thinking about everything she needed to prepare for the funeral tomorrow. A sudden knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, surprising her as she wasn't expecting anyone. Clara opened the door to see Stefan standing there, having come to help her. The people gathered at the wake were whispering about the wreath sent by the royal family. Clara stood in the hall, thanking Stefan for his help, as the funeral arrangements had been simple thanks to the princess. The knight told her he had come to help of his own accord, as he had been worried sick when he heard her crying. The royal carriage pulled up in front of the funeral home, and the princess stepped out, dressed in mourning clothes. Dorothea apologized for being late, but Clara was too moved to know how to thank the princess. She hugged the girl tightly, promising to be with her for the rest of her life. After the funeral, the group returned to Clara's place for tea. Dorothea learned that her maid had an older brother, but he was not in a condition to see guests. Just then, the door to the next room opened, and Clara's brother, Anton, appeared in a wheelchair. He introduced himself and apologized for the trouble he was causing the princess. Anton thanked Dorothea for her condolences and for taking such good care of his sister. The princess insisted she thought of Clara as family was not just about blood, but about someone more precious. Flustered, Clara slipped out of the living room to make another pot of tea. Anton thanked the princess for loving his sister with all her heart and seeing her for who she truly was. He confided in her about his condition, which prevented him from working. He could sew, but no one would buy things made by a disabled person. Hearing that Anton had a talent for sewing, Dorothea had a flash of inspiration. She began to think about how she could help him. Meanwhile, Clara was sulking in the courtyard, hugging her knees, both sad and embarrassed. Stefan came out to check on her and see if everything was all right. It turned out Clara had been afraid to introduce her brother to Stefan and the princess because people always looked down on him. Clara felt ashamed, feeling like she had been putting on a facade in front of Dorothea, as she didn't think she was a good person. With tears in her eyes, she confessed that she was tired of her sick father and brother and hadn't wanted to leave the castle in the first place. Stefan simply pulled Clara into his arms and held her tightly to calm her down. He understood that she had been carrying this burden alone and that it wasn't her fault. The knight spoke of Clara's kindness, the thing the princess saw in her. Being held by him, she felt much better. As she said goodbye to her maid, Dorothea told her to go to Stefan if she needed anything, if she needed any help. The princess said she would be busy for a while, as something important had come up. Back in her study, Dorothea was working late into the night, drawing up her plans for a support center for the disabled. She dreamed of a program that could provide people with funds for treatment and regular medical services. Dorothea also wanted to create a community where people with similar problems could connect, but this required the emperor's approval. The princess remembered that she had planned to build such a place even before her rebirth, but the nobles had hated the idea. High society believed they should only invest in things that would make money for the palace. Karnan had also called the princess's idea a waste of time, saying that useless people were just a burden. Dorothea couldn't understand why people were so looked down upon just because they weren't useful. It made her think that if she had real power, no one would ever look down on her again. These thoughts scared Dorothea, who had promised herself not to ask for too much. But now, she was frustrated that nothing had changed and felt completely hopeless. The girl stood up from her desk as Ray walked in, saw Dorothea's documents, and asked if he could look at her plan. After reading his sister's work, the prince was deeply impressed. He was ready to analyze it and push the plan forward. Dorothea felt it was likely futile, as she would need the emperor's permission even to begin. Raymond offered his sister a helping hand. He promised to go and talk to their father, as it would be difficult for Dorothea to ask herself. The princess thought that perhaps the emperor would actually listen to Ray, and for Clara and Anton's sake, she was willing to try. Raymond promised to go and talk to the emperor. He was willing to do anything his sister asked. The problem was, he had one condition. Dorothea had to thank him and give him a hug. The princess said there was no way, but Ray wouldn't budge. He just didn't understand why she couldn't hug him even once. Raymond collapsed on the floor in frustration, heartbroken that his sister had never done so, never loved him since they were children. Dorothea remembered how, after her rebirth, she would get irritated whenever her brother picked her up. She didn't understand why her hugs were so important to Ray, what they even meant to him. He saw it as a sign that their relationship was moving in a direction where they could understand each other better. When she offered to do something else for him, Ray asked her to kiss his cheek. Dorothea agreed, but said she would only do it after the prince got the emperor's permission. Hoping the princess's heart had opened up to him a little, Ray headed for his father's study. On the way, he stopped in front of his mother's portrait, and his first memory came to mind, his dead mother in a coffin and his father gazing at her. His mother had died, and his sister, Dorothea Milanio, a child with special needs, was born into the world. Raymond held her tightly, afraid of losing another family member, and promised to always protect his sister. Gazing at his mother's portrait, the prince swore to take care of Dorothea and do anything for her. After reviewing the documents, the emperor asked Raymond why he wanted to waste the empire's budget on something as trivial as helping the disabled. He considered such an expense to be excessive, but Ray argued that it was very important. The emperor ordered the prince not to get caught up in trivial matters and to always think about profit, as the prosperity of the empire was what mattered most. Ray insisted that the prosperity of the people was the prosperity of the empire. Without the people, the emperor's existence was meaningless. Hearing Dorothea's name, and that she was also involved in the plan, Carnun flew into a rage. He didn't consider the girl a member of the Milanio family and believed she had betrayed them. Raymond disagreed with his father, saying she was nothing like that, and accused the emperor of not caring about his daughter at all. Carnun said nothing, but he made it clear to Ray that he would not let a girl's opinion sway his decision. The emperor said that the name Milanio carries more weight than we can imagine, and people can't just appear and disappear. You can't be everything to everyone forever. Ray argued that the emperor didn't understand that Dorothea was trying to build a world where everyone had equal rights and helped each other. The prince insisted that he had come to the emperor precisely because the name Milanio carried power. He claimed that Dorothea had proposed the plan because she knew the family had the influence, the funds, and the strength to help people. Raymond didn't understand the point of the Milanio family's existence if it only pursued power, but his father told him of a critical situation within the family. The emperor was furious that Dorothea couldn't summon spirits, as this could lead to the decline of the Milanio. Ray disliked that his father saw the princess as a failure and didn't understand why he hated her so much. Carnun reminded his son about the Phrygia family, who had lost their ability to communicate with spirits, which is why the Milanio family now held power. But due to Dorothea's defect, the imperial authority was in danger, so the emperor advised Ray to care for those who were not defective. The prince didn't understand how they could weigh people's hearts on a scale when they were all citizens of Uber. The emperor considered the conversation with his son over, turned his back, and stormed out of the room. Raymond was frustrated that he couldn't help the people because the emperor only counted on the power of the spirits. The prince headed towards Dorothea, not knowing how to break the news of the emperor's refusal. He told her the bad news, but insisted she should proceed with her plan anyway. He promised to take responsibility for the decision, but Dorothea thought it was a crazy idea. Ray suggested pretending he had acted on his own and delivered a false approval from the emperor. He also offered his sister his money, knowing she lacked the funds to implement her plan. He joked that they wouldn't kick him out since he was the only heir, then immediately regretted saying it. Dorothea grabbed him by the collar and shook him frantically, not understanding why her brother was so desperate to help her. The prince took her hands and said he just liked making his sister happy. He wanted her to unleash her talents and potential, and that was why he was helping her. Dorothea couldn't understand why Raymond loved her so much when he had every reason to hate her. She confessed her sins, admitting that she had always hated him because she was jealous of him. Dorothy wished the prince would ignore her like Kernan and the other nobles, but Ray smiled and apologized to his sister, saying he couldn't hate her. He was happy because the fact that Dorothy thought she was a bad person just for being jealous was proof of how kind she truly was. Ray believed that truly bad people feel no guilt no matter what they do and never have any regrets. He was sure Dorothea was not that kind of person and hugged his sister tightly. Dorothea still found it hard to believe she could be called a good person, but at one point her heart melted and she hugged her brother back, soaking his shoulder with bitter tears as she apologized. Raymond was in a great mood, which Theon and Julia noticed, curious as to what had made the prince so happy. He told them about his growing affection for his sister and how they were collaborating on building a support center. After overhearing the friends' conversation, Nereus Ponce scoffed at the idea of opening a center for the disabled, calling the project insane, but Raymond as usual, didn't take his words to heart. Nereus believed that money should be invested wisely and was sure the emperor would never allow such foolishness. Ponce thought the prince should have been kicked out of the academy long ago for being a poor student and wasting his time on useless ideas. Ray remained calm, thanking Nereus for his concern about other people's problems and implying that he should mind his own business. Ponce pointed out that the royal family was falling apart, and Theon stepped in to defend his friends. Nereus was reminded that he had lost a duel to the princess who had no connection to the spirits. Raymond, still smiling, advised Ponce to mind his own business and the affairs of the Heart Kingdom. And so, Ray, Theon, and Julia left Nereus behind to stew in his bitter thoughts and walked away. Dorothea was explaining the plan to Ray that they had to turn public perception around and stop the discrimination against the disabled. As Ray racked his brain for a way to improve the situation for the disabled community, he had a breakthrough idea. A year later, the support center that Raymond and Dorothea had poured their hearts into finally became a reality. The process was full of twists and turns, but by working with Anton and the others, they finally succeeded. Dorothea, with a smile on her face, was lost in thought about Eden when a cheerful Raymond walked over. She thanked her brother, as everything they had achieved was thanks to him. It all started a year ago when the prince had a brilliant idea, one that allowed their plan to come to fruition. To show her gratitude, Dorothy held out her hand for a handshake with Raymond to show how much she valued his contribution to making her dream come true. Instead, Ray grabbed his sister and pulled her into a tight hug, not caring about who was watching. The prince was incredibly proud that Dorothy was his sister, and he couldn't care less what anyone else thought. The princess knew Ray was the type of person who would stick to his guns no matter what, and she hugged her brother back tightly. Eden began to appear more frequently in high society, stunning everyone with his musical talent. Everyone was praising the young man, so much so that Duke Bronte regretted not having introduced him sooner. Realizing Eden had great potential, the Duke decided to suggest that his son enter the academy. He told the boy to take the entrance exam, just like his older brother. But Eden, after thanking his father for his consideration, turned him down, saying that his focus had changed. Besides, Eden felt that with Jonathan at school, his parents needed a son around to help. Duke Bronte was deeply moved by his son's words and told him how incredibly proud he felt. While attending those social gatherings, Eden found out that the princess hadn't gotten into the academy and had the lowest score. Some of the nobles treated her like a fool, but Eden was amused by the princess's eccentricity. I mean, if she chose all the wrong answers, that means she knew all the right ones, right? Thinking of the princess, the man couldn't help but smile. He had worked desperately, changing everything, just to become the man who deserved her. Raymond excitedly told the princess that he had made it into the top 50 students, ranking 49th. Dorothea was a bit sarcastic about his excitement, pointing out that for a crown prince, it wasn't exactly a stellar achievement. Theon, who had placed first, happily noted how much the princess had changed, how bright and happy she had become. He worked up the courage to ask Dorothea if she would go to Phryderia with him this summer. Theon described Phryderia as a place with a mist-covered lake, a place of extreme tranquility. Dorothy remembered going there with him before her rebirth, when she thought returning to his hometown would do him some good. Theon was sure that if the princess went to Phryderia, it would become an even happier place. Dorothea couldn't understand why he was being so nice to her this time around after she had sworn to reject his love, but she agreed to the trip anyway. Raymond practically pounced on his best friend Theon, complaining that he hadn't been invited along. And so, Dorothea set off for Phryderia, deciding that this would be her farewell trip, the one where she would get over Theon for good. She and Raymond watched the mist-covered city, mesmerized by it all, a result of a deal with the dark spirits. Seeing the freed family's castle through the window, Dorothy realized it looked very different from how it did in her past life. She told herself to relax and act natural. The carriage stopped, the door opened, and Theon offered the princess his hand to help her out. Helping Dorothea out of the carriage, the man was all smiles as he welcomed her as his guest. Theon's mother, Duchess Freed, greeted the guests and mentioned they were lucky with the weather, as sunny days were rare there. Dorothea thanked the Duchess for her welcome and for preparing rooms for her and her brother. Ray suddenly rushed over, grabbed the princess's hand, and pulled her away for a walk. Dorothy spent an hour by the lake, just watching the men fish. Ray was so excited about the fish he caught that he showed it to his sister and suggested they have it for dinner. Dorothy watched her brother, completely mesmerized. She knew she could sit there forever if it meant Ray could be this happy. Suddenly, Julia appeared, bringing some refreshments for everyone. Raymond handed a bucket of his catch to Dorothy, joking that he was ready to give up the throne and become a fisherman. As Julia was telling everyone stories about Theon's childhood, he reached out and offered Dorothy a chance to fish. The princess thought that for her last meeting with Theon, she could indulge in a little daydream, so she took his hand. Raymond wanted to go fishing too, but Julia pestered him, insisting he eat first. Dorothy watched as Theon pulled all sorts of junk from the lake, realizing his fishing skills were truly terrible. He said the only reason he went fishing was simply because he loved the lake. Dorothy thought back on how she had no idea he loved the lake in her past life, as he was always so quiet. Then, Theon suddenly said that fishing was his chance to be alone with the princess. Just then, Dorothy's rod tugged with a huge fish, and she worried the line would snap. Theon wrapped his arms around her from behind to help her reel in whatever was on the line. They lost their balance, and the next thing they knew, Theon was on the ground with Dorothy on top of him. Their lips briefly touched by accident, and the princess looked at Theon, surprised and flustered. Stefan, who was nearby, ran over, worried the princess might be hurt. Dorothy said she was perfectly fine and told Stefan not to let the big fish get away. Theon and the princess took a break with their catch, resting on the ground by the water and chatting about fishing. Dorothy was completely bewildered because he hadn't said a word about the kiss, as if he didn't care at all. She decided it was just an accident and turned down Theon's offer to continue fishing. Dorothy asked Stefan to escort her back, saying she needed to cool her head. The princess lay on the ground, watching the sunset, thinking what a fool she was for coming here to kill her feelings. Just then, Theon leaned over her, saying he had something to talk to her about. He asked Dorothy why she had accepted his invitation, as he always felt there was an invisible wall between them. The princess told Theon that her cold demeanor was just her being very careful, as she remembered not wanting to repeat the mistakes of her past life. Dorothy smiled and said she only wished for his happiness. Theon placed his hand on her shoulder, admitting that he, too, only wished for the princess's happiness. But as she looked at him, she had a sudden flashback, remembering how she had failed him back then. Dorothy teared up again, and Theon couldn't understand why she became so sad every time he said something like that. He moved closer, wiped away her tears, and begged her to stop crying. Theon's gentleness broke Dorothea's heart, but she had to stay strong. He couldn't ruin this. The princess took his handkerchief and a small bottle of medicine from her pocket and handed them to Theon. The man was confused as to why Dorothea was returning them when she could have kept them. Dorothea refused, and looking at Theon, she realized she was finally ready to let him go. She had done everything she couldn't in her past life, and now Theon was sitting there, clutching his things and promising to take good care of them. Dorothea had thought breaking up with Theon would be a heartbreaking blow she would regret, but it was nothing like that. Standing on the balcony, she gazed at the night sky and suddenly met the eyes of the brightest star, which reminded her of the flowers Eden had sent. The next morning, the prince and princess, escorted by Stefan, took a walk through Frederia before returning to the castle. They were chatting when someone behind them told them to turn around. Standing there was a little girl selling seashell ornaments, the kind you could only find in Frederia. It turned out the girl made the jewelry herself, each piece filled with love for someone special. Dorothea bought some and then walked over to Stefan, asking him to lower his head. The knight bent down, and she pinned one of the ornaments she had bought onto his hat. Dorothy had also bought gifts for the other people she cared about, and now she was happily heading home a pack. A year later, it was graduation day at the academy, and everyone was congratulating the prince on finishing his studies. Dorothea came to congratulate her brother with a bouquet of flowers she had picked especially for him. Raymond was deeply moved, but Dorothy got mad at him again for showing his emotions in public. The prince boasted to his sister that he had graduated 32nd in the academy. Well, the young gentleman on the balcony needed a moment to announce the start of the graduation ceremony. Dorothea turned to see it was Theon, thinking to herself how much he had grown since she last saw him. The princess felt relieved that after their trip to Frederia, her one-sided crush on him had turned into a solid friendship. The crowd grew hectic as everyone scrambled to find a partner for the coming-of-age ball. The Grand Coming-of-Age Ball was an event where all of high society gathered, usually held after graduation. Raymond asked his sister if she had already chosen a partner, and for a moment, Dorothy was at a loss for words. She remembered that in her past life, she never found a partner and just stood alone, listening to the whispers behind her back. Back then, Theon had stepped up, announcing himself as the princess's partner and never acting as if he was forced to. Dorothy told Ray it was fine for her to go alone, but he just couldn't understand attending a ball without a male escort. Suddenly, Nereus Ponce appeared, offering to be the princess's partner. Dorothy stared at the approaching man, in no hurry to make a decision, and told Nereus just that. But he was quite sure that in the princess's situation, she couldn't find anyone better, so he was here to rescue a damsel in distress. Just then, a familiar hand rested on Dorothy's shoulder, and she heard a familiar voice behind her. With an arm around Dorothy's shoulder, Eden announced that the princess already had a partner for the night. Eden leaned in to kiss her forehead, saying it had been too long and that he had missed her like crazy. He hoped she remembered her promise, because the princess hadn't written, and he was afraid she had forgotten him. Dorothy quickly assured Eden that she hadn't forgotten, and the man pulled her close again. Witnessing this, Raymond flew into a rage, lunging at Eden and pushing him away from Dorothy. Eden apologized and introduced himself to the prince as the second son of Duke Brant. Nereus was furious that some lowlife, pathetic bastard was stealing his partner. He accused Eden of not even being a student at the academy, saying he had no right to be at the graduation ceremony. Nereus started mocking Eden, but Eden took all the taunts with surprising calm. He didn't go to the academy to learn how to bully people and act superior. Losing his mind, Nereus slapped Eden hard across the face, and Dorothea gasped in shock. Raymond stepped in front of Eden, guessing that Nereus was still angry about losing to Dorothea back then. The prince threw Ponce out, who left seething and grinding his teeth, vowing there wouldn't be a next time. Dorothea worriedly asked if Eden was okay, as his cheek was red from the slap. The princess said she needed to talk to Eden and pulled him aside, but now they just stood there awkwardly, waiting for the healer to arrive. Dorothea started talking about Nereus, but Eden cut her off, asking if she had missed him. The princess thought to herself that she had kept him in her thoughts through both hard times and good. Dorothea wondered why he hadn't written and learned that Eden didn't think it was the right time to get closer. She assured Eden that she still wanted him as her partner and asked if he felt the same, while pressing the princess's hand to his cheek. Eden confessed to Dorothea that he had wanted only her since the first time they met. Dorothea used to love hearing those words, but now she was reminded of her past life. She remembered when Eden told her she deserved everything she wanted and that only she could become the Empress. Dorothea pushed him away, saying she knew his purpose, but she wasn't as useful as he thought. The princess believed Eden chose her to get rid of his one hang-up, being an illegitimate son, despite his outstanding looks and talent. Dorothea felt a princess treated worse than an illegitimate child was pointless, so she couldn't give him what he wanted. Eden took the princess's hand, insisting that no one was more beautiful than her and that she was talking nonsense. Dorothea thought he was overestimating her and would surely be disappointed later, so she pushed him away and left. But Eden thought that it wasn't greed talking, but her dreams and hopes, and she stopped in surprise. Dorothy still couldn't figure out why he was so focused on her. He just smiled in response and promised that she would understand everything soon. The Emperor summoned Dorothy, but he had been sitting in silence for half an hour. The princess pretended to be busy, sitting and racking her brain for all the possible reasons Karnan had summoned her after that day. Suddenly, a servant entered the room with a wooden crate. He opened the crate and took out a bottle of wine with Dorothea Millenario written on the label. The Emperor reminded Dorothy that as a child, she had begged him to make wine in her name, and now her name was on 100,000 bottles. Dorothea was angry that Karnan wouldn't fund her project, but would waste money on wine, but she clenched her fists and thanked him. The Emperor announced that Dorothea could do whatever she wanted with the wine, or he would pour it into the river. The princess thought it was a huge waste, as if Karnan was testing her for something. But he didn't see why he needed to test her. He had simply prepared a gift for her coming-of-age ball. Dorothea was in her room, thinking back on her meeting with the Emperor, finding his behavior very strange. The princess tasted the wine and liked it so much that she almost regretted giving it away to the snobbish nobles. That being the case, Dorothea decided to use the wine for something good. She sent a case of wine to the Knights of the Royal Guard, who couldn't help but make some snide remarks. Stefan suddenly appeared beside them and ordered them to show respect for the name Millenario. While preparing for the coming-of-age ball, Dorothy told a surprised Clara that she had donated all the wine to charity. The princess had also sent wine to the Knight Order, hoping Stefan would like the gift, and had also saved some for Clara and her family. Clara thought the dress the princess had chosen for the coming-of-age ball was too plain. To divert attention from her dress, Dorothea asked the maid if there was something going on between her and Stefan. As Clara stammered out a lame excuse, Dorothea rushed out of the room. The princess walked into the hall, sure that no one would care what she was wearing, but every nosy noble in the hall was staring right at her. Eden came over and offered Dorothea his arm, and she was actually a bit nervous at the formal gesture. On the side, Theon silently watched the couple chatting animatedly. Julia approached him and asked if he was okay, and he claimed he was just a little worried. Theon admitted it was an honor to be Julia's partner at the coming-of-age ball. As Dorothea and Eden walked through the ballroom, she could hear people gossiping about her plain dress behind her back. Julia was sure people were just jealous, and that if the late Ray were here, he would be very angry. The girls said Dorothy and Eden looked good together, but Theon ignored Julia and just stared at the princess's back. The ball began, and the Emperor appeared, summoning the Spirit of Light before the crowd. This was the first time Eden had seen the Spirit of Light, but honestly, he wasn't very impressed. He thought to himself that despite all the legends surrounding it, there was nothing special about it. Even though Dorothea knew she shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth, she was actually a little glad that Eden found it underwhelming. The opening ceremony ended, and she tried to shake off the aggressive crowd, who kept poking at her sore spot for not being able to summon the Spirit of Light. But Eden stepped in, telling everyone that the princess was perfectly capable, as she herself shone like the Spirit of Light. On the balcony, Dorothea thanked Eden for saving her and standing up for her. The princess pointed out that he now fully understood her situation and that he must realize she had nothing to offer him. But just as Eden was about to tell her she was wrong, she turned at the sound of a familiar voice. It was Theon. Dorothea turned to see him with Julia, and they had come to congratulate her on her debut. After thanking them, she found herself feeling strange. She didn't hate Julia as much as she used to. Eden took Dorothy's hand and asked Theon if he was returning to Frideria now that he had graduated from the academy. But Theon said he planned to stay in Lampas, as he still had things to learn. The coming-of-age presentation ceremony began, and Eden once again took the princess's hand and led her to the dance floor. Back at the celebration, Dorothea watched Eden dance, thinking how well he moved, which was why everyone was sneaking glances at him. Nereus watched him with pure rage, as he believed he should be the one in the spotlight, not that mud-blood Eden. So, Nereus deliberately wrinkled the carpet before Princess Dorothea's dance, wanting to embarrass her and Eden. Eden walked up to the princess, took her hand, and asked her to dance. The crowd parted to make space for the couple, and they began their dance. Dorothea felt like she was floating. Being with Eden made her feel very calm. She realized she was completely in love with him. The man admitted that there were still things he wasn't good at, like, for example, winning a princess's heart. Eden spotted the folded carpet and realized someone had done it on purpose to make someone trip and look foolish. He reacted quickly, smoothly guiding Dorothea away so she wouldn't trip, and she noticed the wrinkle in the carpet too. The Emperor entered the hall and watched his daughter dance with Eden. Meanwhile, Julia was panicking because Theon had fallen ill again. Eden asked Dorothea if she had ever wanted to control the Spirit of Light. Getting the affirmative answer he expected, the man spun the princess faster, and suddenly there were specks of light all around them. Then the hall's lights went out, and Dorothea was terrified, remembering the exact same thing had happened in her past life. But the specks of light around them were so intense that the Spirit of Light illuminated the entire hall, and Dorothea had no idea what was happening. Eden spun her around the dance floor, trying to convince the princess that she was the rightful heir to the throne. He assured her that she was the perfect person for the Empress's throne, and everyone was stunned that she had summoned the Spirit of Light. Out on the balcony, Dorothea demanded that Eden admit the Spirit of Light was his doing. He kissed her hair and admitted he just wanted to prove to those idiots that she was the one who deserved the throne. She angrily pushed his hand away and told Eden to stop, because while they were dancing, her heart had raced, and for a moment, she thought she had actually summoned the spirit. But when she realized it wasn't her power, her heart broke, and Eden, more than anyone, should have understood that feeling. Dorothea pressed him, wanting to know where he got such immense power, because she was sure she hadn't summoned the spirit. After a pause, Eden reached into his pocket and pulled out a summoning crystal. He knelt on one knee before the princess, offering her the crystal and begging her to use it. He confessed that he had failed to give her the stone before the execution back then, which was why he was doing it now. She was shocked, as it sounded like Eden had also returned to the past just like her. But he corrected her, saying that, to be precise, he was the one who had asked for time to be turned back for the both of them. Eden decided to tell her the truth about everything, starting from when he was young, weak, and powerless. Even before his regression, Jonathan would often mock and dismiss him, and there was nothing Eden could do about it. But soon, a golden opportunity presented itself. That day, he went hunting with his brother, and Jonathan said he didn't want to be in a group with Eden and wouldn't share a horse with him. Perhaps if he had given the horse to his brother then, things would have been different, but the horse beneath him suddenly reared up. Next, Jonathan was dangling from the edge of a cliff, just screaming for Eden to pull him up. Eden knew he couldn't pull his brother up alone. They might both fall together. The rope wasn't long enough to be tied to a tree, and instead of asking for help, Jonathan just kept cursing at him. Eden glanced at his brother, turned around, and left, promising to go get help. But by the time reinforcements arrived, Jonathan had already fallen to his death, making Eden the sole heir to the Bronte family. From then on, the guy felt like he owned the world, watching as those who once looked down on him suddenly started fawning over him. It was then that he started playing his little handkerchief trick, watching as the foolish girls scrambled to pick it up. One day, Dorothea caught Eden doing this, and she actually found it amusing. That was the first time a guy realized someone could understand his twisted jokes and that he and this girl were the same kind of people. Not knowing she was the princess, he introduced himself and asked for her name. He was very surprised to learn she was the princess herself, and even more shocked when she offered him a job at the palace. He accepted because Eden saw a hidden potential in the princess that no one else noticed. He believed the reason she couldn't summon spirits was because she was too perfect. Eden was convinced that fate had connected them, and he was willing to do anything for the woman he loved. He didn't care what means he used to get what he wanted, and he would sacrifice others if necessary. Eden discovered that Theon had become the princess's fiancé through deceit and was prepared to kill him. Somehow, he learned that Theon wasn't doing it out of love, but simply to get close to Raymond, or more precisely, the light spirit. Theon didn't know how Eden knew all this, but Eden had figured it out on his own. After all, after so many years, a red-eyed boy was born into the freed family, and it was highly likely the dark spirit would awaken with him. Since it was impossible to stay in the palace all the time, even while in Raymond's inner circle, the best way to remain there was to marry the princess. However, Eden already knew that Dorothea would soon kill her brother and seize the throne. Theon realized the Chancellor hadn't killed him because after Raymond's death, Theon himself would not escape death either. Eden was sure that Dorothea's husband wouldn't tell her anything, because then he would have to admit he married her for his own selfish interests. Eden walked out, leaving Theon to wonder why everything had gone so wrong. He had actually tried to tell Dorothea the truth a few times, but seeing how much she loved him, he just couldn't do it. Sometime after that, rumors spread that Dorothea's army had crushed Emperor Ray's troops. They called it the Princess's Rebellion and demanded she prove her right to the throne by summoning the Light Spirit. But ever since Raymond's death, Dorothea's insomnia had worsened, and she looked exhausted. Eden didn't know how to help her, but he kept telling her that she was the only one fit to be Empress. So, Eden gathered his knights and sent them to find the Light Stone, which was said to be the source of the spirit's power. Not long ago, Julia had also gone searching for this stone, hoping to help her beloved Theon. The knights knew this and searched everywhere for Julia to take the stone from her. After hearing in the market that they were hunting her, Julia rushed to the place she had arranged to meet her friend, who was supposed to take her to Theon. But Eden was already waiting there, a sharp dagger in his hand. He knew the meeting spot because Julia had mentioned it in a letter to Theon, and the Chancellor was intercepting all their letters on Dorothea's orders. Just as Eden was about to give her the crystal, he witnessed a scene between the princess and her husband. Seeing Dorothea's love for Theon, Eden decided not to give her the crystal, as it would prolong his rival's life, which was definitely not in his best interest. He just comforted the sad girl again, promising her that one day everything would be in her hands. Eden understood that Dorothea needed love, and he could give it to the princess, but she was only interested in Theon. After some time, the garden Dorothea had planted for Theon completely rotted and never bloomed again. This angered Eden, because even on the verge of death, Theon had left a lingering sense of guilt in the princess's heart. Theon realized it was Eden who had killed Julia, so he decided not to reveal his secret to the princess, just to let Eden continue to suffer. It wasn't long after Theon killed himself in the princess's room. It was then that Eden realized this was the most perfect revenge Theon could have enacted. Just a few months after Theon's death, Dorothea's court decided to form a new state. They were angry because as the empire was collapsing, the empress lay weak and did nothing. The courtiers worried the empire could be attacked at any moment, as Abara was in a state of chaos. The populace was constantly rioting, and the empire was hit hard by famine and plague, for which they blamed the empress. The courtiers told Eden they were going to overthrow the tyrant and install a new ruler in her place, the chancellor in their eyes. But the chancellor himself retorted that he would not recognize anyone but Dorothea Milonio as the ruler. Eden stayed by the empress's bedside, while she never stopped grieving for her dead husband. Eventually, Dorothea finally got out of bed, but the angry mob could not be calmed. They were screaming for her head. Eden pleaded with her to let him be her husband, promising he would do everything to quell the angry mob. Dorothea's reply was that she could let him be whatever he wanted, but marriage was out of the question. So when the rebels stormed the castle to capture the empress, Eden was powerless to help her. With a heavy heart, he walked to the execution ground, where the crowd was roaring, hoping he would become their new emperor. He knelt by her side, still hoping she would beg for mercy, but Dorothea refused to live without Theon. She confessed she was a failed villain and wished Eden success as the new ruler. Then, the chancellor made one last attempt, offering her the light spirit crystal. But the empress refused the offer, and Eden watched with tears in his eyes as her head rolled. He couldn't take it anymore. He bolted, running blindly, feeling like his heart was about to explode. Seeing Dorothea die, Eden finally understood the pain she had felt when Theon was killed. It only now dawned on him that he should have given her the crystal back then and watched her live happily with her husband. Perhaps if he hadn't been greedy for more, his girl would still be alive, and he wouldn't be blaming himself for the choices he made. As Eden sobbed by the lake, the crystal suddenly shone with a brilliant light, and he knew someone was offering him a lifeline. Rooks, the queen of the light spirits, appeared before Eden, having learned that all the Miloneos were dead. She offered the man a new contract, a blood contract. Hearing this, Eden exploded because Rooks could have appeared for Dorothea Miloneos, but she didn't. The queen explained that the Miloneo bloodline had become impure. Dorothea was the first who couldn't summon a spirit. Rooks kept urging him to sign the contract, promising to grant the spirit summoner the power of light, but Eden felt there was no point in the sun shining anymore, because his son, Dorothea, had fallen, and he just wanted to see her one more time. So he promised Rooks he would sign the contract if the queen could bring Dorothea back to life. But Rooks couldn't do that, because bringing the girl back to life would interfere with the power of Quiz, the king of the dark spirits. Besides, resurrecting the dead could disrupt the time of the entire world, as well as Eden's personal timeline. But the guy didn't care about that. He was ready to relive all the terrible experiences of his childhood just to bring Dorothea back. So, the queen finally agreed to a new contract with Eden, on the condition that he must return to his dark past. Then, when he opened his eyes, he realized he had truly returned to the past, to the place where he grew up, and this could only mean one thing. The princess was alive again. Eden decided then that it would be best not to meet the princess in this life, and was even glad that he couldn't get into the academy because of that accident on the road. Just as he had finally decided not to ask for anything in this life, and only for the princess to be happy, he unexpectedly ran into her on the beach. Things turned out differently, and their fates were still entangled in this life. After finishing his story, Eden confessed that he had hoped Dorothea wouldn't remember anything from her past life. The girl realized that thanks to him, she had a chance to start her life over, while she had thought all his words were just born of a desire for power. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she was seeing him in a completely new light. Eden wiped away Dorothea's tears, knelt before her, and offered her the spirit stone. She was and always would be his one and only empress. He wanted her to reach the highest position and shine, not out of greed, but purely out of love. Eden pulled her closer, confessed his feelings, and everything around them was bathed in the brilliant light of the light spirit. Dorothea was grateful for everything he had done, but she didn't want to accept the crystal, feeling she didn't deserve it after all the terrible things she had done in the past. Just as they were arguing about whether the princess deserved to be empress, her father summoned her. The emperor was angry because she had been hiding the fact that she could summon the light spirit. The princess insisted she couldn't do it and that she didn't even know how it had happened during the ball. Karnan ordered her to show her ability anyway, and Dorothea noticed the look in his eyes had changed. He used to look at her with contempt, but now that Karnan thought his daughter possessed power, she could feel his interest. Dorothea confessed she couldn't summon the light spirit, but the emperor's face darkened, and he ordered her to prove her worth. The girl didn't understand why it was so important to him that she had the spirit's power, especially with Prince Raymond around, whose power her own might just get in the way of. But Karnan needed this, at least to quell all the talk about the decline of the Malneo family. Since Dorothea was the child Ellis had given her life for, she could not be the end of the bloodline. She had to prove that the Empress's sacrifice was not in vain. Karnan turned to the window and ordered his daughter to learn how to handle the spirit from Raymond, but not to take up too much of his time. The emperor was convinced that if Dorothea acquired this gift, the rumors about the royal bloodline being cut off would finally stop. After talking with her father, Dorothea sat in the garden, his words echoing in her mind about how she must now fulfill her duties as a proper member of the Malneo family. She stared at the crystal in her hand, remembering that Eden was a contractor, so as long as he was nearby, she could use the stone to summon the spirit. He had promised to always be by her side, so she could call upon the light whenever she needed. Raymond found her lost in thought and happily ran to his sister, congratulating her on her new ability. The Linus Core Palace was just one of Ellis's many chambers and had been empty since her death, but now, on Karnan's orders, Dorothea was to move in. Ray was amazed by his sister's incredible power, and he was thrilled that when she summoned that burst of spirit energy, all eyes were glued on her. Dorothea admitted she hadn't meant to use the power, but Ray already knew, having seen the surprised look on her face. Raymond told his sister to relax. It was just spirit control, nothing to make a big deal about, so don't overthink it, sis. Eden approached, and the princess apologized to her brother so she could speak with the guy alone. They stepped aside, and she handed the crystal to Eden, asking him to take it back. She confessed that she didn't want to be empress, which caught him completely off guard, because Eden thought all Dorothea wanted was to become empress and live happily with the man she loved. But she didn't want the past to repeat itself. She wouldn't give it even the slightest chance. Eden kept trying to persuade her, saying that with this crystal, Dorothea could pay back all the disrespect she had suffered, and everyone would see her as a worthy heir. The princess was apologizing. My God, she felt she wasn't good enough, because even you, a non-Mylenio, could control the spirit. Eden had hoped she would be excited to receive that power because, honestly, he didn't want to mess up again. The guy had thought about giving her the crystal many times, but if he wasn't around when she needed it, she could get into big trouble. So he had been waiting for the coming-of-age ceremony, so he could always stay in Lampus. But it turned out to be all for naught. Eden took the princess's hand and offered to escort her back to the banquet hall, where everyone was waiting for them. At the banquet, Poe was supposed to serve the cake. Raymond was very worried about Theon, but his friends told him he was fine now. He realized that the power outburst during Dorothea's coming-of-age ceremony was because of him. Theon apologized to the prince because he couldn't hold on until he arrived. It was just that his condition was so bad that for a moment he lost control of the dark spirit. Raymond also apologized for not getting to his friends sooner, but thanks to the princess's spirit, everything was resolved. Raymond happily told his friends that Dorothea would soon be moving to another palace. Julia was nervous because the princess now possessed great power, which meant she might covet the throne. Raymond knew Dorothea had always been sensitive about the topic of the throne, but he didn't think it was a big deal. The prince had always thought his sister was very smart, so it wouldn't surprise him to see her as empress. Julia said, "How can you be so calm? Man, you could lose the throne over this." The prince just smiled and said that even if he didn't know what Dorothea was after, he knew what he wanted. The princess entered the hall arm in arm with Eden, and she noticed the atmosphere of the crowd had completely changed. The looks they gave her were no longer curious or interested, but full of tension. Dorothea realized they were all thinking about the possibility of her becoming the next empress. Nereus came forward, applauding the princess for having been able to summon spirits all along while keeping it under wraps. She said it was a complete accident, but Nereus didn't believe it was a coincidence that the lights went out and she started glowing. The crowd surrounded Dorothea, begging her for another dance and showering her with compliments. She realized how an enemy who once held a knife to your throat could suddenly change sides, and how a friend you thought would always be by your side could stab you in the back. Nereus raised a toast to the princess, and the crowd cheered and congratulated her. Dorothea raised her glass, thanked everyone for their well wishes, and told them to eat, drink, and be merry, just as they had always looked down on her. She downed her drink and laughed, saying it was just a joke and for everyone to relax and have fun. Eden remembered the princess wanted to try the cake before leaving and brought her a slice. She was touched by how attentive he was to every word she said and everything she wanted. Stefan overheard other knights talking about how lucky he was to be serving the princess, as a rise in status meant he would get a promotion too. The knight didn't even bother to respond. He was just happy that Dorothea was finally getting the recognition she deserved. In the carriage with Eden, the princess remembered the scene from her past life where he played the handkerchief trick. She remembered the toast from today and realized she hadn't changed at all. She wondered why Eden had kept Theon's secret, as things might have been different now. Why confess only now? He could have kept the whole truth buried forever. Eden took her hand and confessed he couldn't bear to see her carry the guilt for the deaths of the prince and Theon. The princess thought she hadn't changed, but Eden saw it differently. He offered her his power so she could be with Theon and live happily, because that was the very reason he came back. Even if he was destined to love her forever, he would always stay by her side so she could use his power. Upon arriving at the castle, Eden asked to escort her one last time and offered his hand at the door. Greeting her at the entrance were the people she loved: Stefan, Clara, Joe, and Poe. Dorothea took Eden's hand, hoping today wouldn't leave a bad memory for him. As she walked toward her family, the princess wished the guy a safe journey and told him to be careful. The girl entered the castle, where everyone welcomed her with open arms and applauded her coming of age. Poe presented her with a cake baked especially for the princess. Everyone congratulated her, just like the people at the palace, but now she felt at peace and didn't want to lose these precious feelings. She realized that being with the people she loved would make her much happier than being empress, and that was enough for her. After the celebration, Dorothea collapsed on her bed and found the light spirit crystal in her pocket. She went out to the balcony, realizing she couldn't stop thinking about Eden, even though the stone could help her be with Theon. After a hard day, Eden soaked in the bath, thinking about how things had turned out. When he first came back, he thought the princess didn't remember anything from the past and hoped he might still have a chance one day. But when he saw the freed family scarf in her bedroom, he knew he had no chance in this life either. Eden always tried to be by Dorothea's side, but her eyes were always on Theon. In truth, he didn't want to hand over the stone. He felt that once she had it, Dorothea would be gone forever. In the end, he gave her the crystal and did what he could, but now it was all over. There was a knock on Eden's door. It was his father and stepmother. He got dressed and opened the door. They wanted to know how the princess's coming-of-age ball went, and it was clear the Bronte family was thrilled that their son was Dorothea's partner. Eden told his parents he was tired and apologized, but as he turned to go to bed, he suddenly heard his brother's voice from behind. Jonathan was standing in his bedroom, glaring at Eden, who just wanted him to get out. Jonathan was convinced his brother was acting so cocky because he was hiding behind the princess's skirt. Eden kept saying he was tired and begged to be left alone, but Jonathan pushed him. He yelled that Eden's life wouldn't change just because he went to a ball with the princess, because he was still just a bastard. Eden leaned in and told him that unlike Jonathan, all he had was his family name, so he'd better protect it and learn to read the room better. The guy ordered his brother to watch his mouth from now on and kicked him out of the room. Eden collapsed onto his bed, exhausted, wondering what he's supposed to do now since he's reached his goal and has nothing left to strive for. Suddenly, he saw a shimmering light around him and clearly felt the princess summoning, the spirit. He thought she was showing off her ability at the palace, but she was actually just standing on her balcony thinking of him. Eden clutched his chest, hoping the girl could feel him, just as he could feel her. Sometime later, Duke Bronte and his wife came to the emperor's palace to introduce their sons. Jonathan greeted the emperor and mentioned he had recently graduated from the academy. Eden also entered the drawing room and introduced himself to the emperor as the younger son of the Bronte family. Carnon commented that not only was the guy handsome, but he carried himself with a nobility that was completely different from his brother. The emperor remembered Eden as Dorothea's partner at the ball and asked how long they had known each other. Hearing that the princess and Eden had met in Sriracha, Karnan asked if she had summoned the spirit's power there to protect the princess from trouble. Eden replied that the first time he saw Dorothea summon a spirit was at the ball. Karnan observed the guy, who showed no signs of worry or fear, and thought to himself that he needed to be wary of him. Not missing an opportunity, the Duke decided to mention how the princess had befriended Eden in Surishan and spent a lot of time with him. Jonathan was angry because they were there to introduce him to the emperor, but everyone was only talking about his younger brother again. Noticing her son's displeasure, the Duchess began to praise Jonathan to Karnan. The guy bowed and told the emperor that he was eager to serve him and gain experience as the future head of the Bronte family. But Karnan turned away, declaring that Lampas was no place to train future family heads. The parents were impressed with how Eden handled himself in front of the emperor, and he thanked them for his good upbringing. Eden looked at his brother and felt sorry for him. He could have bragged about taking care of Epstein, but instead, he just made a fool of himself. He patted Jonathan on the shoulder, thanking him for bringing him to Lampos, but the guy just pushed Eden's hand away. Their parents pleaded with them not to fight, and Eden understood. They were counting on him to marry Dorothea and help Jonathan get on the right track. But Eden felt these expectations were too high, as this mess wasn't part of his plan at all. Just as Eden was thinking about being intimate with Dorothea one more time, she suddenly walked into the room. He was completely stunned because the princess actually wanted to talk to him alone. After seeing off the Duke and Duchess and wishing them a safe journey, she asked Eden to follow her to a private room. As they walked past the courtiers, Eden overheard them singing his praises and realized that while he used to enjoy it, he now only found it awkward. The entire walk, the princess didn't even glance at him, so the guy thought she was giving him the cold shoulder. Dorothea sat down on a sofa and gestured for Eden to sit opposite her. He was nervous as hell, having no idea what she wanted to talk about. She said that she had always felt this second life was a punishment for her past atrocities. As a result, she was tormented by being the only one who remembered everything, yet had no way to make amends. Whenever she started to feel happy, she would tell herself she didn't deserve it. After all, she had made so many people suffer. Hearing this, Eden realized that all the love and sacrifice he had poured out for her had only caused her pain, and he had never even known what she truly wanted. But then, without any warning, Dorothea admitted she had changed her mind, and that this life was a new chance given to her by Eden. She told him that she had once told her story to her brother, without revealing her name, and the guy just stood there in shock. After thinking it over, Raymond believed that the person who gives others a second chance deserves one as well. She stood up from the sofa and admitted that thanks to Eden, she finally knew her brother's thoughts and had also saved Theon. Thanks to him, she got to know Stefan, Clara, Joe, and Poe, and had the chance to protect the people she cared about. The princess pulled Eden closer, apologizing and thanking him for giving her all of this, while the guy's eyes began to well up. Eden buried his face in the princess's shoulder, holding her tightly. He suddenly felt embarrassed for crying in front of Dorothea, while she was seeing this real, and even somewhat cute, side of him for the first time. He admitted that her gaze made him blush, but Dorothea just looked at him, thinking how different he was now. Back then, he was perfect, handsome, yet dangerous, and that was what made him so charming. But now, he regretted his life, had sacrificed everything for her, and was crying because of her, which made the girl unable to understand how one person could have so many sides. Dorothea moved closer to him on the sofa, leaned in, and asked if he liked her. He confessed, and her cheeks turned bright red, as she still couldn't believe someone could actually like her. Eden took Dorothea's hand and pressed it against his pounding chest, admitting that although he had promised himself he wouldn't fall for her while she loved someone else, he couldn't help himself. He caressed the girl's face, while she still couldn't believe someone could love her so much. Eden had heard that Dorothea refused to become the Empress, and he wanted to know what her plans were now. She admitted that she just wanted to live a quiet life. In her past life, everyone suffered because of her, so now she needed to make things right. Eden was excited for her. If this was what Dorothea truly wanted, then she should go for it. As if struck by an idea, Eden reached into his pocket, took out a small locket, and handed it to the princess. He thought the crystal was inconvenient to carry, so he had this locket made to hold it. Eden placed the locket around her neck, and Dorothea felt like her heart was about to leap out of her chest. He reminded her that when they were children, she had refused to accept expensive gifts because they weren't close enough. After wishing the princess a good day, Eden left. Stefan and Clara came in, and Clara couldn't hide her excitement about the gift. Dorothea was surprised when her handmaiden admitted she had known for a long time that Eden had feelings for the princess. Clara said she always felt that even as a child, he had the eyes of an adult, as if he had already been burned by love. The handmaiden bluntly told her mistress to follow her heart and not care about what others think. Raymond went to see his father, who had been waiting for him in his office for a long time. Karnun was angry that his son was late. The emperor urgently needed the plan to increase wheat production in Barahan. Standing before the emperor, Raymond said he wanted to change the wheat variety to increase production by 5 tons. But Karnun was dismissive, pointing out that given Barahan's population, there wasn't nearly enough land to grow that much wheat. He shot down all of Raymond's ideas and told him that if he really wanted to run the empire, he'd better step up his game. After the meeting with Karnun, the prince had another meeting to attend. He was frustrated, having thought he could catch a break after graduation. But he was officially in the game now, and nobles from every province were lining up to win his favor. Raymond found it hard to accept the fact that he couldn't even manage agriculture, something he thought he was good at. He was frustrated, thinking to himself that he hadn't relaxed in the garden for a whole week. When the princess saw her brother, she noticed he looked exhausted. Dorothea noticed Raymond's fatigue, but she only said, "I'm just worried your fatigue will affect state affairs." Eden couldn't figure out why Dorothea hadn't used the soul stone yet. He was just waiting around every day, but she hadn't even touched the damn thing. The guy was unsure of his place in the princess's heart, not knowing whether he should go to her or wait for her to show up. Eden also didn't know if he should approach her with a smile or if Dorothea wanted him to keep his distance. In short, he had no idea if he still had a chance. But regardless, he wanted to walk the same path as her, which meant he needed to start acting honestly. Standing by the window, Eden noticed a group of people waiting downstairs and went down to see them. It turned out to be servants sent by a group of girls, all bearing gifts for Eden. He thanked them for the gifts, as it would be rude to refuse, but told them not to send any more in the future. Suddenly, a red-haired woman stepped out of the carriage and walked straight toward Eden. He recognized her as Monica Alfanita. She handed him a letter and told him to read it. Monica had been engaged to Nereus Hark and was supposed to be finalizing the wedding details. Monica's family had no reason to refuse a marriage with Prince Hark, so it was basically a done deal. Before Eden's return, he had enjoyed her flirting with him. Talking to her allowed him to get information on Hark, and he liked the way she made fun of Nereus herself. To gain Eden's trust, she was willing to reveal her secrets and admitted she didn't want to marry Hark. Realizing she was about to confess, Eden told her not to say anything. Words that couldn't be taken back. The guy was sure Monica wanted to break off her engagement and was now trying to use him. Eden said that in terms of marriage prospects, only Raymond and Theon were comparable to Prince Hark. He didn't want to get involved in that kind of mess, so she turned and walked away. But later, Monica and Nereus did call off the engagement, and that guy blamed the whole thing on Eden. After Nereus ascended the throne, he attacked the Uber Empire, so maybe the breakup was just an excuse to start a war. And now, this woman was handing him a letter, which Eden promised himself he would read. In the letter, Monica invited Eden to have dinner with her at Caro's restaurant next week, as she had something to discuss with him. The guy disliked the aggressive tone of the letter, which only reminded him that this girl still had no taste or manners. Eden tore up the letter because, in his past life, it was this very letter that led to Monica and Nereus's breakup and started the war. Dorothea wondered why Raymond always liked to hang out in her room. Looking at his sister's sweet smile, the prince admitted that just looking at her face helped him relax. The prince remembered how Dorothea used to get angry with him for not acting like an heir to the throne. It was hurtful back then. Dorothea used to think he had to be perfect to be emperor, but now she understood that a heavy hand wasn't always the answer. Now she hoped Ray could drop his heavy facade in front of her and relax, because even a prince needs to catch his breath sometimes. Raymond complained to his sister about his mountain of work and how the emperor wanted him to help increase the wheat yield. But no matter how hard the prince thought, he was clueless, as the soil was too barren for even crop rotation to help. After a moment, Dorothea told her brother that she had heard of a country that dealt with a similar problem. They alternated crops with different soil nutrient requirements, which greatly improved their harvest. The girl told the prince to try this method, and he was excited, wondering how he hadn't thought of it himself. Raymond thanked his sister for the advice and for helping him stay sane. The prince was once again convinced that Dorothea would be a better empress than him, but she hated it when he brought it up. The sister confessed to her brother that she was thinking of starting to practice fencing again, and asked for his help. Stefan went to see Arthur, the captain of the Knights of Brilliance, who had summoned him. The captain praised Stefan for doing a great job protecting the princess all this time, and wanted to make him his second in command. The problem was, this meant the knight would have to give up his duty as Dorothea's personal guard and serve the greater good from now on. While training in the garden, Stefan was thinking about the captain's offer, a promotion without having to take an exam. But the guy was thinking, what's the point of being a knight if you can't earn your promotion fair and square? Suddenly, Dorothea ambushed Stefan from behind, but he quickly regained his footing and knocked the sword from her hand. Though it hurt a little, she admitted he was the most amazing knight and that she didn't stand a chance of hitting him. Seeing Stefan training since sunrise, Dorothea sensed something was on his mind and asked him what was wrong. She had heard about the possible promotion to vice captain and didn't understand why he was upset, as it was great news. Stefan, trust me, you deserve this position. Even without me, you have to take this chance. Just trust me this once, okay? Move forward. I care about you a lot, and I want what's best for you. Stefan thought to himself that 10 years ago, the princess was just a child, barely up to my waist. Now she's all grown up and talking to me like this. The fragile little princess who was always on shaky ground is gone. I used to see her as a toddler, but she's grown up, and I'm only just realizing it now. Dorothea is already moving forward, and I'm still stuck in the same place. Realizing this, Stefan knelt before her on one knee and expressed his gratitude. Afterward, the inauguration ceremony was held, and the princess, of course, was in attendance. She still hated being around these nobles, but she tried to smile and be polite to everyone. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out to Dorothea. She turned to see Theon, who was looking for her on the prince's orders. The guy offered his hand to the princess, proposing to escort her to her brother. Dorothea took Theon's arm and walked toward Raymond, thinking that now that she knew everything about the guy, he seemed different. She hadn't noticed his good qualities before when she was only focused on her own feelings. The princess couldn't understand how she could have fallen in love with Theon without knowing anything about him. After walking a bit further, Dorothea realized Raymond wasn't actually looking for her and asked Theon why he had lied. The guy looked flustered and apologized for using the prince as an excuse, saying he thought she was uncomfortable with those people. Dorothea found herself thinking that, for some reason, she was no longer as happy as she used to be when Theon showed her concern. Suddenly, the guy asked her to dinner this week, as he had something important to tell her. He moved closer to the girl, admitting that this conversation needed to be with her alone. He explained that on the day of her coming-of-age ceremony, he had to deal with an urgent matter and couldn't congratulate her properly. Dorothea guessed that Theon was upset about the dark spirits that day, which was why the hall lights had gone out. After Eden gave the princess the summoning stone, she began to research everything about spirits. She discovered that any power in excess would overload, and that the powers of light and dark balanced each other out. It was then that Dorothea realized Theon married her because he couldn't handle the dark power alone. Sometimes he would deal with it through Raymond, which was why Dorothea hated her brother, feeling he had stolen her husband. The princess guessed that Theon would tell her about the dark power at their meeting and agreed to see him at the restaurant. Clara rushed in, telling Dorothea the ceremony was about to start and that she had found the package the princess had asked for. The girl rushed over to Stefan, excited that she wasn't late, and handed the package to the knight. Upon opening it, Stefan was surprised to find the sword of Sturclips. In her past life, Dorothea loved collecting famous swords, and this was one of them. Stefan was thrilled with the gift, as it was the first time the princess had given a sword to her knight. Suddenly, Stefan took out the brooch Dorothea had once given him and handed it to the princess. She thought he was returning it, but he pointed to his chest and asked her to pin it on his doublet. Clara rushed over, helped Stefan fix his uniform, and told him he looked incredibly handsome. The knight took her hand, leaned in to kiss it, and said she was always so beautiful, which left Clara completely flustered. Watching Stefan receive his award from the Emperor, Dorothea finally understood what it felt like to be proud of someone you care about. In addition to promoting Stefan, the Emperor also knighted Joe, who had been training his heart out.